This is Vaughan Gregory from Grey Forsaken, and you are listening to Discography Discussion.
Jeff's going to get really upset with us about that. we have a third host, but he's taking a temporary hiatus.
Yeah, I noticed there was 3 on the website. I did check out. I did my research.
Yeah. You're like, what have these guys been up to? Can you tell that we're a lot more honest than we used to be? Dude, when I did Centurion Outpost, I praised everything. I said everything was great, everything's all good.
Yeah.
And at some point in the middle of that process, I was like, dude, I'm not being honest at all, and that's not biblical either. to lie, just to
I think it's, for me, it just comes down to not wanting to hurt people's feelings.
Sure.
It's not about being dishonest,
right.
Like trying to be dishonest. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I wasn't like, I'm going to lie to these people today.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It is like honesty. Yeah, it can be really tough to, when is it honest and when is it when you're just trying to not be hurtful.
Sure.
It's a tough balance, I reckon.
And if you have difficulty balancing when it's honest and not being hurtful, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan. Vaughan Gregory of Grey Forsaken.
Hey, how you
There
going?
are too many words. We're going to have to do 5 hours on Grey Forsaken when we can, but I believe, Dan, the appropriate word here is the original guest host.
Right. For sure.
How is it going, Vaughan?
Yeah, it's going really, really well. I'm here in Perth, Western Australia. It's Sunday evening, and I'm stoked to be here. It's great to be chatting with you guys, and also about one of my favorite bands as well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's our pleasure. We're awed by your presence.
Yeah.
Again.
Don't be.
What is it, 12 years since?
12 years since the last time we talked. I went back and listened to that old Centurion Outpost episode where we had the whole band. We didn't just have Vaughan on, and I couldn't understand half the stuff that we were saying on that. Like, this audio quality was so bad. I could barely.
Yeah.
The limitations of the technology.
Yep.
I did have a mic issue that day. I remember Matt wasn't coming through that clearly. I do recall that. Yeah.
I remember working as hard as possible to get that to sound as good as it possibly could.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Considering it was 2006, I think I did all right.
I think it's fine, man.
Yeah.
I remember the fact that we recorded that in my bedroom, and we called, Australia. Like back then, that was pretty amazing. I thought. Now we don't think anything of it. I could pick up my phone and Skype you right now on it, and it would be nothing at all. Anywhere I'm at in the world, I could just do that. But
yeah.
Now.
Step 1, call Australia. Step 2, record podcast. Step 3, profit.
Profit, yeah. We haven't seen a whole lot of that.
Probably the 13-hour difference is probably the biggest technical hitch, really, isn't it?
It actually took me a couple weeks to figure out how we were going to do it. Because I was like, how did we do it last time? Last time I just remember that we just did it. I don't remember, working out all the logistics. So then I went online and I checked, okay, what's the time difference between St. Louis and Perth, and all that, and it gave me a 13-hour difference. So for me and Joe, we're sitting here sipping on coffee at 8:30 in the morning, and Vaughan's ready to go to bed.
Yeah, well, like I say, I'm a bit of a night person anyway, so I would normally be up now. So there's absolutely no drama with that.
Sweet.
So no, I'm happy to be doing this. It's great.
And the caffeine is working its magic. So before we get into Tourniquet, I'm going to take the time to say thank you to everyone who's listening to this episode. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Google Play. We are on iTunes. We are on Stitcher. We are on TuneIn Radio, so if you have an Amazon Echo product, you can say to it, Alexa, play the latest episode of Discography Discussion, and she will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening, and Dan is going to tell you all about 5-star reviews.
We've gotten a number of 5-star reviews. Remember, if you leave us a review on the on the actual iTunes page or really anywhere, we will read it live on the podcast. And we really appreciate the support that we've gotten so far. It feels really good at this point to be a 5-star rated podcast on iTunes. The more ratings we get, the more exposure we get. So if you're a fan of our podcast, just hit that 5-star button. Or if you have an issue with something that we're doing, let us know. Leave us whatever kind of review you think we deserve. So with that being said, I would like to also very much shout out David Cassidy for supporting us on Patreon. I'm just floored by the fact that somebody would want to support us financially in this. So we're really honored and really blessed that you would do that for us. So thank you so much, Dave.
And now Vaughan is going to tell us all about Grave Forsaken.
Grave Forsaken. Well, I'm the singer and one of the guitar players in Grave Forsaken, which is we're a band from Perth in Western Australia. We are a Christian band, and we've been around since 2004. And these guys were very helpful for us in the early days. And should I just mention we got a new album out? Is that cool?
Go right ahead. Go for it.
Yep. No, we just put out our most recent album. I think it's the 6th album. It has begun. So yeah, that's come out now. So we've just been trying to get the word out about that lately, actually. So yeah, it's been good. We've had a good run. It's been good.
Yeah, I gotta wait till I get my next paycheck, but I'll definitely be purchasing at the very least a digital copy, if that's yeah.
We put it out through Soundmass initially. It will eventually be on iTunes and all of those sort of platforms, but just initially we've just got it going through Soundmass, who we've been working with for a long time. So yeah, it's been good. We're really happy with it. It's most people have heard it are very positive. So
yeah, I heard a few songs. Just to give a little background for me, I was contacted by Vaughan and Company back in 2005, 2006, sometime around there, and they sent me their first demo, and I have been a big supporter of the band since then. This is Grave Forsaken is one of those success stories where on the show we typically talk about bands that start off really strong and get better over time, and I feel like Grave Forsaken is kind of the opposite of that, in the sense that I have never seen a band grow in such leaps and bounds. Every album is just so much more out of this world than the one before it, and that's not even to say that the old albums were bad. They had a good start, but they just built on it, and what you've got now is you've got one of the go-to thrash bands for Christian metal, in my opinion. So we were really excited to have Vaughan on here to talk about Tourniquet, who is one of the other go-to thrash bands in Christian metal. So so this is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a fun discussion.
Yeah, thanks for those kind words as well. I'm very flattered by that. We just try to improve on it, really. You know, we just try to get better, and people say that they get better. To us, it's kind of the next album, but I think it's just experience as well.
Sure.
You know, you just sort of learn, you get a bit of feedback, you hone in on things a little bit, sort of quite natural process. But yeah, I really appreciate those kind words. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime.
And before I get too bold and start reading Dan's original review of Grave Forsaken from the Centurion Outpost magazine, I'm going to say Vaughan.
Dude, you did not tell me you were going to do that.
You're right, I didn't. Tell me all about Tourniquet.
Well, Tourniquet, they were one of the seminal early Christian thrash metal bands, I guess. They were very important in the early days. It was Guy Ritter, Gary Lenaire. I've never been sure if it's Lenaire or Lenaire. I've always said Lenaire.
I say Lenaire as well.
Yeah. And Ted Kirkpatrick, they were the key 3 guys in the beginning, and I'm guessing they came from they seem to be from the area near you in America. I just don't want to get my geography wrong, but I think they're from that part of the world. But they were certainly very influential in the early days, and I would dare say back around 1991 they were regarded as the premier sort of definitely the premier Christian thrash band, but probably one of the premier Christian metal bands, along with probably Striper, obviously a slightly different genre. But would you guys agree that Tourniquet was probably regarded certainly in the top 5 or so.
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to throw out. There's another podcast that I'm a fan of, and he was talking to Kurt Bachman from Believer, and he was talking about how like everybody's got their big 4 of the thrash bands, but for the Christian fans, we also have our own big 4. We've got Tourniquet, Deliverance, Vengeance, and
Living Sacrifice.
Like those are kind of or Believer, would fit really well in that spot, But
I think you have the same thing as you do with the big 4. Who is the 4th? Like a lot of people say, is it, do Anthrax deserve to be the 4th in the big 4?
No, they don't.
So that's a discussion that goes on.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say Testament. Obviously,
Sepultura,
I know that's not what we're talking about now, but it's a similar kind of debate. You've got the obvious 3 with the Christian thrash, obviously Vengeance, Deliverance, and Tourniquet. But who is the 4th? But no, I agree. But I just remember when I first got into Christian metal, it was a bit of a different time then, because living over here in Australia, you had to order things in through the obviously didn't have the internet back in the early 90s, so. Right. It wasn't as easy to get stuff. Like you'd have to order a tape, and it might take 6 months to arrive, or you might hear a song on a compilation. So actually, I was listening to Christian metal for a while before I actually heard Tourniquet. I heard of Tourniquet. Oh, do you guys say Tourniquet or Tourniquet?
Tourniquet. Yeah.
I know that sounds crazy, but in Australia, you'd describe the actual medical thing as a tourniquet.
Interesting.
So people see it over here and they say, "Oh, who's Tourniquet?" And I sort of tell people, well, they call themselves Tourniquet, so I'll call them Tourniquet, even though you might pronounce it Tourniquet over here. So I'm rambling a bit, but I do remember having the Hot Metal Summer compilation, and it had You Get What You Pray For on it, which I think was a pretty seminal compilation. And I was certainly blown away by that song, especially as a younger person, having not been exposed necessarily to a huge amount of metal like you can do now. That was certainly pretty mind-blowing for me as a young teenager. I became a pretty big fan pretty quickly, and obviously they had their first album, Stop the Bleeding, in 1990, and that was a pretty important album for Christian metal, I reckon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know Tourniquet's always been the band that anytime anybody said, I don't listen to Christian bands because all their music sucks, I always say the same thing Dan says. Have you heard Living Sacrifice, and have you heard Tourniquet?
Yep.
Because Tourniquet's just a good band. That's what they've always been, and I would watch any show where they were playing with any member of the Big 4, or the currently acknowledged Big 4, because they'd fit right in with anybody.
Yeah. No, that's certainly.
Especially after 1990 Stop the Bleeding, when we had the original vocalist of the band,
Guy Ritter,
with his glorious King Diamond impersonation.
And I'll throw it out there and say that Guy Ritter is still my favorite Tourniquet vocalist.
Really?
He is. And we'll get into Luke Easter a little bit later. There's things I like about him as well, but Guy Ritter was so all over the place as far as his delivery, that on this first, I guess we're talking about Stop the Bleeding now, so we'll just go in. But
transition, go.
Yeah, so Stop the Bleeding, 1990. This was their debut to the world, and it starts off with a song called "The Test for Leprosy," which is just really introduces you to the weirdness of the band. Anyway, I mean, it starts off. Yeah, there you go, right there. So it starts off with which is this is probably the moment that it starts off dun, 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 like it starts off aggressive, and this was the moment where if you're standing in a Christian bookstore and you're listening to this, you're either thinking, oh my God, finally, or you're thinking, oh my God, this is satanic, and so I mean it was extreme for the time in Christian metal. Later on, obviously bands like Vengeance and Mortification were much more extreme. But Tourniquet was a really big deal. I think the Stryper crowd really picked up on Tourniquet because this was during a time period where Stryper was kind of like people didn't like him as much in the Christian music side of things. So for whatever reason, Tourniquet really swooped in and soaked up a lot of those fans because the first Tourniquet album, Stop the Bleeding, isn't as much of a straight ahead thrash metal record as we would get later from the band. The first album is definitely a mix of traditional heavy metal and lots of thrash thrown in there, but it wasn't just a straight thrash record. And Guy Ritter's vocals, man, he's got this super deep, he's got a very like lower register singing voice, and then also the highest register singing voice you could imagine. He goes from low to high so much on the record that there are songs where, Joe's King Diamond impression isn't really far off. He hits those super, super, super high notes, and I don't always love it, but this is one of the most unique Tourniquet albums because nobody really had anything to compare it to at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you often the King Diamond comparison is very commonly made about this album, and I think the interesting thing about it, it's really the only true Tourniquet album that it has Guy as the sole singer, because obviously on the next couple, Gary does quite a few of the vocals as well. So this is the one time that you really obviously, and Gary does some vocals on this one as well, but this is predominantly Guy. So it actually. It's a little bit different in the Tourniquet catalogue, I reckon. The next couple of albums definitely follow on from it, but it sort of stands on its own a little bit with its uniqueness. They never quite went to this place again after this first album, but it was certainly a mega classic. And I still remember the first time I heard it. This we're actually I had this mate Chris, and we were both into our metal, and he comes home and he says that I've now got a new favourite band, and he puts on Stop the Bleeding, and he played a couple of tracks of it, and we were just sitting there in his car just blown away by this album. And I can still remember sitting there hearing it. It wasn't the first Tourniquet album I'd heard. I'd actually I'd by then had a couple of others, but because of what I was saying before with the difference and having to order stuff in, I hadn't actually heard this one before I'd heard a couple of the next couple of albums. But I remember hearing this one and thinking, wow, now that is a killer album. So it made a huge impression on me, this album. It was one of my favourites for a great number of years, actually, this particular CD.
Sounds like the car ride I had with Dan, where he put on the Thrashing Floor and said, I have a new favorite band.
The Thrashing Floor, yeah.
Are you serious? Is that the song he put on?
Yes, he did.
Said that?
He did.
Because that was the song that Chris played. It was the Thrashing Floor.
What is it about the Thrashing Floor?
One in particular that he played, and that's track 5. It is a very good song, and extremely heavy, and it just hits all the right notes, really, that song. Like I said, it made a huge impression on me when I first heard it, for sure.
See, I thought he was messing with me because I had recently really discovered King Diamond. I know King Diamond is King Diamond, and he needs to be known for everything that he's done, Merciful Fate, etc., but he was one of the artists that I knew who he was, but I didn't know his name. The same thing happened to me with Tom Waits. It took me 26 years of my life to figure out, oh, that's Tom Waits. Yeah. Even though I knew who he was, it never clicked. So because we had first listened to Welcome Home and all these King Diamond things, I thought he was messing with me. Because he throws on the Thrashing Floor, and I'm like, is this the new King Diamond? No, this is Tourniquet.
I think what I said, no, this is way better.
That sounds like you, yes.
I had actually, due to sort of my background in music, I actually heard a lot of the Christian bands before I heard like the bands that they supposedly sound like. So I actually didn't hear King Diamond until after I heard this. So when I finally did hear King Diamond, I was like, oh, okay, I can see where the comparisons come from. So I kind of went backwards with that one, to be honest.
Yeah, I was the same way. I make no excuses or anything. When I tell people that I got my start in metal with Christian metal, I mean, even back in Centurion Outpost days, I didn't even know really what a lot of the subgenres were. We learned a lot of that as we went, and
the subgenres. They got out of control.
Yeah, and then
in the
it's
early
so
2000s.
funny because like now I don't really care that much about the subgenres, but back then it was like really important. But I remember this record. One of the things that I liked a lot about it was Gary played really fast. He has a really awesome guitar tone. For like his solo, like some of his solos, they just sound magical. Like in comparison, even on later stuff, he really, a really good example is even stuff like Ark of Suffering. He just sounds, or even Tears of Korah. Tears of Korah has some of the best guitar work in a Tourniquet song that I've heard. And it just blew me away, like how clean it all sounded. Like it had that thrash attitude, but like it had kind of the sheen of traditional heavy metal in it, that clarity. They must have recorded in a really good studio, which was really not common back then. A lot of the Christian metal tapes that you heard back then sounded like garbage, because a Christian metal band couldn't get the kind of footing in the 90s like they can now. Now anybody can walk into a studio, or even record it at home and it sounds fantastic.
Yes.
But back then, and I think that's part of the reason why this band was so impactful is because their first album sounded so good.
Yeah, it really it stands up alongside. There'd often be this Christian versus non-Christian music sort of almost divide, and sort of for reasons like you mentioned, the production and all that. But this album was one that really did stand up, and I agree with what you say about it sounding so clean. It really, it just absolutely, it just kicked through the speakers, this album, and lots of clarity. And I think, Ted Kirkpatrick is a world-class drummer as well. And I think that stands out. He's almost like his own instrument in the band. Like he's almost like lead drummer of Tourniquet.
Right.
Like bands have a lead singer. He's like the lead drummer. I sometimes think of it like that. It's got, every drummer has their own style and sound, but Ted is so much of the personality of Tourniquet, and I think that was also part of what made the huge impression that they originally had. It was just this really good production and excellent musicianship as well, and it really was a 10 out of 10, this album. And I'm not surprised it had the impact it did at the time. It was really something quite special in the Christian scene for sure.
Yeah, they really killed it on this record, and I think one of the most interesting things about it is that there's a certain potential there that you can hear, in that you're like, they can actually do more. They can go further than this, because Gary's playing is a little fast. It's a little out the gate, Ted is obviously a better drummer than the band he's in, if that makes sense. So he's being like, there's a lot of really complicated drum parts in that record that don't need to be there necessarily. It's great that they're there, but they didn't. He could have just literally just kept a beat the whole time.
Yeah,
and
I think that's what I meant by the lead drummer kind of comment. He really does have his own voice. Sorry to cut in there.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
We really, it really, just hearing the potential there. You're like, wow. Whenever I listen to this record, or the first time I heard it, I was like, man, what are they going to do next?
Do I get to talk about what they're going to do next now?
If you want to lead off Psychosurgery, Joe, you go right ahead, buddy.
If copyright wasn't a thing, I'd let Psychosurgery lead itself off.
Just the next hour is just Psychosurgery. Yeah.
Yeah.
1991 Psychosurgery. While I was listening to Dave Mustaine and the glory that is Symphony of Destruction, Dan was listening to Psychosurgery. And then we met in the middle one day and everything was glorious. I don't even know what to say here. This is one of the best metal albums I've ever listened to. Just
with the exception of one song.
Well, yeah. I was trying to ignore that song. I still try to ignore that song.
Yeah.
This was definitely, as a teenager in the 90s, this was my favorite album. Like, absolutely no question. To me, this was just Christian, non-Christian, whatever. And it wasn't just like a bias towards it. I genuinely had this was my favorite album for many, many years. And it may even still be my favorite album, but as you guys know, you end up listening to hundreds and hundreds of albums, so your favorite album one month might not be your favorite album the next month. But this is definitely one I would they talk about the old desert island disc, but this is an album I would definitely keep if I could only keep 10 or 15 albums. This is one I'd keep for the rest of my life. This is one of the most important albums for me, and I'm not gushing over it. I probably sound like I'm gushing, but this just had such an influence on me as a teenager back in the 90s. Now, I came in a bit later, so I got into Tourniquet probably a couple of years after this album came out, but from sort of 94 onwards through to 2004 beyond, this was my favorite album. I would listen to it. I actually could recite absolutely every single lyric on this album. You probably still could. If I put it on now, I could probably still sing along with every single lyric.
We're listening to it right now on our headphones.
I think that's going to be a bonus episode. Vaughan reads Psychosurgery from memory. Can we do that?
Yeah. Whatever. They should just get the guys over and they should just record a song. A Tourniquet song.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I don't want to gush over it too much, but it just was a very important album for me. And what I loved about this album also thematically, I felt that every song, what was different about Tourniquet in the Christian scene was more so than other bands, they seemed to, on this album in particular, deal with real issues. Mm-hmm. Would you guys agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they talk about child abuse. They talk about people with special needs. And, of course, Tourniquet's always going to be talking about the treatment of animals and and things like that. So they were talking about real stuff, whereas I think a lot of bands, especially at that time, I think Mortification was out then, and Vengeance was out, and everything with Christian metal had always been very focused on. I've noticed a theme of warfare throughout Christian metal at that time, where it was like very ethereal, spiritual warfare. It was, like Deliverance, Weapons of Our Warfare, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Like Catechumen?
Yeah, or like Holy Soldier, like all those kind of bands that, were always talking about like really kind of out there spiritual issues that we're not really thinking about on a daily basis. And here's Tourniquet being like, no, dude, this is a child in an abusive relationship, an abusive home. This is a child that has special needs, and those needs aren't being catered for. This person's being abused. We're taking for granted where our food comes from, or we're taking advantage of where our scientific breakthroughs come from. It's at the expense of animals and things like that. And even though there's some things that Tourniquet talks about that I don't particularly agree with, they were still out there doing it. They were addressing issues that I don't think in Christian music, some of these issues that they're talking about were addressed by non-Christian bands, and so I thought that was really what set them apart too. And the medical terminology on this record, mm-hmm. way more, higher up there even than on Stop the Bleeding. This was a little bit more medical, harder to pronounce song titles, like stereocratic atrocities, or
I always said stereotaxic atrocities.
Yeah, stereotaxic.
This is how I read it.
That sounds right. Yeah,
it's not actually in the song. They never actually say that. That's often the case. But
right.
Well, it is funny. Like any discussion of Tourniquet has to talk about their song titles. I love that about Tourniquet because it had this. It was almost like a language that was Tourniquet language, and it obviously cranked up to 11 on the next album, which we'll get to. But
yes, we will.
Yeah, I always thought that they had a real skill for coming up with Tourniquet sounding song titles, and I'd always get a kick when a new album came out, and it would have a bunch of new Tourniquet style songs, and just the titles, I thought, it just made you feel like you were part of the Tourniquet thing,
Sure.
You got it, you were sort of in on it, and no, I agree. I was really a big fan of those words in the titles,
because that was always a thing with metal, was to come up with creative song titles. But most bands were just kind of pulling random words out of a dictionary. Tourniquet actually kind of came up with their own language, which I still struggle with sometimes. But when you write a song and call it the Skeezix Dilemma, I'm in. But we'll get to that on Pathogenic Ocular Dissonance.
That's about Uncle Wiggly.
Ixnay on Uncle Wiggly.
Sorry.
Can I just went and I actually just wrote down a few of my favourite tracks on each album we went through, and the ones that stood out for me on this one, if you don't mind me sharing this.
Go ahead.
That's going to be this week's playlist is going to be all of Vaughn's favorites.
Vaughn's recommendations. Yeah. Then I don't have to make a playlist.
I was always a huge fan of, not necessarily like the I think all fans are like this. It's not, sometimes it's the deeper cuts that you like, I guess. But I was always a huge fan of Vitals Fading.
That's a good one.
That song really stood out to me, particularly the section where it sort of goes into the riff, you know, the du-du-du-du-du-du, and then he does the wrinkled hands, reach out, cold metal rails bit. Like, that always just sent shivers up my spine, that section of the song. And just even for that little, you know, some songs I'll have a 10-second or a 20-second section, and it makes the song.
Sure.
That just used to give me chills, that bit. And the other one that would give me chills was Broken Chromosomes.
Oh my goodness, that song still gives me the shivers listening to it. It's just so... It's a very emotional Tourniquet song, and you don't really get emotional songs out of thrash metal bands, you know?
No. I still think, and again, I'll sound like a gusher here, but I do mean it about this album. I still think that like something like Broken Chromosomes is one of the great moments in metal when it comes down to like the outro bit of it, where he's like doing the men fail me, but the Son of God saves, and the when I'm face down, I'm talking face on the ground. You know, that whole bit at the end where you've had this song that's sort of quite a serious topic and quite grim in a way, and then it ends on this sort of note of hope. And I found that Tourniquet would use that a lot in their music. They would talk about the issue, and then they would conclude it with hope. And that format really appealed to me in their music, and it's definitely been something that I've done with my own music, where I've sort of tried to look at an issue, and then in the like last verse or the final chorus or the fade out or whatever, I'll be try to do something positive to end the whole thing on a positive note, if you know what I mean. And that's actually a technique that I learnt from this album, from that kind of getting into the issue and then finishing with hope. And so I think they did that better than anybody, particularly on this album. And I think if you look at nearly every song, it kind of does that. They finish with hope. So those were the two that I wrote down. But I'm curious to know which song you guys don't like, if you're going to share it, because I loved every track on this album. I didn't have one I didn't like.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dan.
You don't have to share it. I don't know if it's a secret. When you said that, I was curious.
Yeah, no, it's the song Spineless. I'm not a big fan of rap metal. And this was done very strange. I mean, this is 1991, so like rap metal wasn't like a thing yet, you know, like really. Yeah. And so it was just really jarring to hear that, and it just comes across as really dated, because I feel like most of that record most of that record is very serious and actually I don't know, like is more timeless. Like you could show it to somebody and they're not necessarily sure if it was recorded in the 90s or if it was newer, you know, because there's a lot of newer thrash bands that sound like they were from the 90s. And but this really dates it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, and but it's weird. It's not even the rapping that bothers me as much as it's just like the band trying to like move into that. And like I feel like maybe had I been listening to it day one, 1991, I would have thought it was cool. But now when I listen to it, it's a little cringeworthy to me.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it interesting that Anthrax and Public Enemy are credited with creating rap metal when they did Bring the Noise, but that was 1994?
Yeah, Tourniquet did it in 91. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was so all over this album as a teenager that I can hear what you're saying now with, you know, the hindsight of a couple of decades. I think I was so into the album that I mean, it was a different time, wasn't it? Like there wasn't an internet and things like that to even discuss this kind of thing. So I just took that at face value, that they were doing a song with those sort of rap vocals. But what I loved about Spineless, like, you know how I mentioned that I like knew all the lyrics. Like I took great satisfaction in like learning all of those, really quick sort of rapped out lines.
Right.
Like, take a look at your friends there. Is that what you want? They're as empty as air. Just out for a joint. 3, 7, 9, 10 for 14 times. Huffing at you. Those rhymes. All that. I don't know if that is copyright infringement to quote the lyrics.
It's going on the podcast.
Just be able to sing along, and it used to be like a good party trick. Like I'd put on this Tourniquet tape and I'd sing along with it, and people would be like, "That's crazy, man! Like nobody should be able to sing along with a song like that."
Right.
But it's actually where I learned a lot of my own sort of vocal style. Like I'd be driving along. This is when I got my license, and I'd be listening to stuff like that, so like belting it out, in my style, and then I applied that with my own band. So yeah, that actually stuff like that taught me how to do thrash vocals in a funny way. So very important for me. But I do hear your I think what you're saying is valid about it. Definitely, it's not a way I'd ever looked at it, but it certainly could come across as a bit dated now. For sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't hold it against a record for being out the year that it's out, but it's just, yeah, for some reason it just didn't hit me right because maybe I was in maybe a more enlightened state or whatever. When I listened to it, I was like, man, what is this?
Yeah.
I did think it was cool hearing Gary and Guy kind of go back and forth at the end, though. I thought that was kind of neat. This record vocally, too, there was a big change in the band as far as, like, he had kind of knocked off those high-pitched falsetto vocals. He sang more in the deeper register in this record. And you also heard a lot more of Gary kind of stepping up to the mic and doing the when the thrash vocals were needed, he stepped in. Although it is interesting hearing Guy do the vocals on a Dog's Breakfast, because it almost seems like, based on what we know about the band, it almost seems like that would have been a song that Gary would have sang the lead vocal on. But Guy does it and it sounds cool. It sounds unique. And I was really big fan of the way that song sounded. That's one of my standout tracks, is the Dog's Breakfast. Especially like with the lyrics too, might be a little hard for people to get into if they're not Christians. It's a little divisive, and he basically, long story short, he basically goes through all these crazy different religious beliefs and how they're wrong or stupid or whatever, and that's very honestly the way I used to be, like, this is dumb, this is stupid, like, and it's hard because I appreciate that song now because it's a little bit more than just these religions are stupid, as much as it's more like, hey, man, whenever you hear something, don't just take it at face value. Really think about it.
Well, with that song in particular, again, go back to the pre-internet days where you couldn't just search for something. In all seriousness, I mean it when I say I learned everything I know about like cults and whatnot from that song. You know, like that was my it's a bit like how Iron Maiden fans, they know everything they know about history from Iron Maiden songs. I knew everything I knew about, Alexander, we're talking about Iron Maiden, but Alexander the Great, I know everything I know about Alexander the Great thanks to Iron Maiden. And this is the same. I know, still to this day, if you ask me about some of the what they talk about in that song, I'd still reference in my head this song to like churn out a bit of info about the various religions that he's talking about. Right. And it was probably quite a brave song, like thinking back to it now, because they may have had, people who, they might have been offended by what they were saying, because it's not like those religions and like cults, if you want to call it that, weren't without their followers. But I suppose the thing is, most of those cults would have probably denounced heavy metal anyway. So. Probably
not listening to much Tourniquet, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They probably weren't listening to that much of that. A different time, really, then, wasn't it? They might be a bit more open-minded now, but probably back in those days they wouldn't have been. Right. It was a different time, the 90s.
Yeah, and I think the thing about Christian metal, especially in the 90s, is that it was a little bit more Christian, so to speak. And that's probably a controversial way to put it, but everybody was a little bit more bold. The hardcore bands were super bold, and I think it was really just more of one of those, like, we have to have this strong stance in order to have this movement.
And we can do this too.
Yeah, we can do this too. We can be offensive too. Slayer can write about how much they hate the church and hate all this stuff or whatever. So why can't we do the same thing? About cults or about Satanism or about whatever, about whatever they wanted to talk about. That's one of the best things about expressive heavy music is that you've got the platform to talk about what you feel is important. And that's one of my favorite things about Tourniquet is they still did it, but like one of the biggest complaints people have against this type of metal is that it's super cheesy. And I don't think Tourniquet really came off like that, at least not in the early albums. I don't think they had cheesy music. I think they were just as technically proficient as their counterparts, and they had the chops just like everybody else, but what really set them apart was their subject matter and
a sweet drummer
and a really, really good drummer. Yeah.
Yeah, he really does. He's really a lot better than a lot of the other drummers out there. Like he really, I mean, what sort of platitudes can you give Ted? He does an amazing job on all the albums, and I think it was such a critical part of their success. I mentioned that about the previous album as well, but I reckon if maybe they didn't have that drumming, it might not have. It really put them into that world-class bracket. Like people couldn't ignore Tourniquet. They weren't just another band. Like Ted really gave them that. He was better than most drummers, Christian or otherwise, and that really helped them, I think, because people heard that and they were just in awe of his drumming, and so I think that was really important for them, definitely.
Yeah, it's one of those things with Tourniquet where you can't really. I mean, the first records are so good that it's like it's very comparable to Metallica's discography in the sense that maybe they didn't necessarily have a first four like Metallica did, but they're we
had a first three.
But I mean if you think about it, Stop the Bleeding was basically Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning mixed into one. Dog's Breakfast is Master of Puppets, and Pathogenic is Injustice for All. It's their heaviest record before the band would go through a really big sound change. So is there anything else we want to say about Psychosurgery?
No, I mean, I have been very gushing, but I mean, I think I said everything and I'd like to about that. I love all the tracks. It was an important album, and I think it's their best. They've never topped it, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's definitely their definitive classic, Yeah.
In a world where you're showing somebody a band and you say, so let me play their greatest hits for you, the majority of what you're going to play comes off of Psychosurgery.
Right.
Unless you're me, the first thing I'm going to play you is the Skeezix Dilemma from 1992's Pathogenic Ocular Dissonance.
You're going to start with that? Really?
It's me. I have control.
All right, whatever. This record is really weird. There you go.
Oh, man. Vaughan is showing me up right now.
This record is
my original copy.
With the original cover?
I got my first copy of that from a guy.
That's the 92 Intense version.
Yeah, that's the one I have too. I actually got that from a guy. Me and a friend of mine, Buddy from he was the bass player for End of Destiny. Him and I did we did a Christian metal radio show on the physical radio for a couple of years, or maybe it was 1 year. I can't remember exactly, but it was. There was a guy that was on before. See, we played all the new stuff. We played the death metal and grindcore and metalcore and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And there was a guy that was on before us that only played stuff like Tourniquet, Mortification, Sacrament, Deliverance. Like he did all that stuff. So he was called the Power Outage, and he did. He played all that classic Christian metal, which was great because it took us an hour to drive up to the studio for the show. So we would just listen to his show on the way up to do ours, and would just get more and more amped up. But I remember telling him like, yeah, man, I really like. He's like, what Tourniquet albums do you have? And I was like, I got all of them except for Pathogenic. He literally just reaches into his bag and goes, here. and just hands me the original the original release of that record,
and the world was never the same.
It blew my mind, man. Like, and I didn't hear it until much later than I'd heard the other ones. I mean, I'd heard Skeezix Dilemma, and I'd heard a few songs online, but the way this record comes together, it's probably the heaviest Tourniquet record that they ever did, and it's mostly sung by Gary.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I touched on before, and with Stop the Bleeding being the only sort of album where Guy's actually pretty much the main lead singer. I think you see a transition through those first three albums where it's probably more like 50-50 on Psychosurgery, and then by this one, Gary's doing a lot of it. This was my first full Tourniquet album, and I've just totally gushed over Psychosurgery, and Pathogenic Ocular Dissonance, in my opinion, it's only not the best Tourniquet album because of the existence of Psychosurgery. Like, to me, Pathogenic Ocular Dissonance is only just a tiny bit. It's like picking your favorite kid. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're very they're almost equal, but I just lean towards Psychosurgery because of what it meant for me. But this album, absolutely, this was my first full Tourniquet album, and I got it from a place called Bible Society Bookstore that was in Perth, and it was probably one of the first technical sort of thrash albums that I ever heard, just in general as well. Being sort of young and getting into music, so this was my benchmark for Tourniquet for a long time. I didn't hear Psychosurgery until after I had gotten this album. And it certainly it blew me away, and it was this album that actually gave me my love of Tourniquet, but that then continued on. So then Vanishing Lessons, which we're going to talk about next, obviously, that was actually my first Tourniquet album that I got as a new Tourniquet album. So this was a little bit older when I first heard it, but it was so I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, it made a big impression on me. So yeah, over to you guys.
Yeah, this record's weird. I love the intro. I love this kind of the slower intro. The other two Tourniquet albums before that were a little bit more just out of the gate. You know, you just go right into it. This was the very first where they have this big long epic intro that was really good. It's like starts off with this almost like, I think it's Ted talking. TED Talks. No, but I think Ted.
The original Ted Talks.
Whenever I hear TED Talks. Yeah. I just get a picture of him in my head. It's quite funny.
Right. Yeah, so Ted speaking over the intro to that song, and he almost sounds computerized, like they computerized his voice a little bit, and this record just sounds like it sounds very sci-fi in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it does.
There's a song where they actually pretty much use a Mr. Spell to talk, which is really cool. At one point too, it would say really weird things. It was all like the sun reflects sunlight, like droplets in the air or something. You probably have the lyrics out for that one, but it was. There was one where it just stops and goes, "I don't want to go to the movies tonight."
Yeah, it's like brilliant.
Yeah,
and then it goes into that.
Yeah, it's like so psychedelic. Yeah.
It's so the album just it has so many riffs and parts, and it goes up and down, and I just remember listening to it and like just the ride that it takes you on. You'll be in one riff, and then it will move into something like another more technical riff, and just the dynamics of it and things like that. I don't want to go to the movies tonight. Just the whole album sort of, it was like I like your comment about it sounding sort of quite sci-fi, because it did. I would agree with that. But what really struck me about this album, if I can share probably the two tracks that stood out to me, definitely Pathogenic Ocular Dissonance. I don't always necessarily like the title track of an album. Like, often bands get it right. I think in this case they did name the album after an extremely strong track. I think that's a brilliant song. And the other one has already been mentioned, the Skeezix Dilemma. Both of those songs are they stand alongside anything that's out there, and particularly Skeezix Dilemma, it sort of takes you through such a journey. And then I think it's think it might be Victor's cat. Even you hear like in the song at one point.
Yeah.
I'm sure I read that in a magazine once somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So both those songs were real sort of standout tracks to me. And the other thing about this album, I found it took the whole. We talked about this Tourniquet song titles. This was the album where they crank it to 11. Like they never got so. They never pushed the whole song titles so far, like ruminating virulence and spectrophobic dementia and the classic gelatinous tubercles of purulent ossification.
I know. It's what in
brilliant.
The world is... Yeah, it's great, though. Like, it makes you feel like you're listening to something really special, and it's fun to just throw those song titles out. Well, I really like, and just... and then for the next 30 seconds, you're saying, like, just pure, higher level medical terminology, and it makes me feel smart whenever I tell people,
I listen to Phantom Limb. I like Phantom Limb.
Well, Phantom Limb's a good song, and and Phantom Limb was kind of our first preview as to where Tourniquet was going to go in the future.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Because everything that we'd had before that was pretty much straight ahead thrash with a little bit of traditional heavy metal thrown in there. This one had it starts off with kind of more of a bluesy. Relaxed intro, and it's actually one of the most different sounding songs on that record because it comes right in after Pathogenic, and Pathogenic is probably the heaviest Tourniquet song ever recorded. It's the only one I can remember that had blast beats. It was just almost death metal sounding in the chorus. As far as the music side of it went, and Gary's vocal delivery in the verses on that song is spectacular. I always loved the verses of that song. Like the Aguandi seas east to west simultaneously. Oh my God, that's my favorite part of the song when he comes in like that because it just he sounds so strong, so authoritative. Like it just oh my gosh, he sounds so good.
Yeah, and then. Later in the song where Guy comes in doing the when red is green and green is grey, that whole bit, like the whole feel of the song changes, and that was that whole dynamic and tempo change and just the whole musical journey that Tourniquet would take you on. I think that song really sort of embodied that spirit of Tourniquet, and a song I didn't mention earlier was the actual title track of Psychosurgery as well. I think that's a similar kind of song has that real Tourniquet kind of feel with the Gary. I think Tourniquet at their best when Gary's doing the verses and Guy's coming in for the choruses. Most of my favorite material has that contrast between the two of them.
Yeah, that was established in Arc of Suffering, I think, was that formula.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that was really important for them as well. So sorry to go back to an older album, but I think that was a real strength on this album, and they did complement each other very well. But no, I definitely agree with what you're saying about Phantom Limb, and it's something I've never thought about. But as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, you're dead right. Phantom Limb really was that was a good benchmark for where they were going to move after this album.
Right. So this is the point of the band too, where things kind of start to change.
Yeah.
We are now Guy Ritter essentially exited the band, I think, right after the recording of this one. I read a really long interview with him one time in HM Magazine, and Guy, if you're listening, hit us up. We'll talk to you.
We're totally down.
We're totally down to do the interview. Yeah. Get his side of the story on that. But I think what it was is that it had something to do with the fact that he just felt like the band was getting a little too heavy for him, and a little bit more of a heavy metal band and a little bit less of a Christian ministry. Which, with a lot of Christian metal singers, they view the music as a ministry more than a band. And I'm not speaking for the rest of the band, but in his opinion, what he said was that he felt like to them it was more of a band first and a ministry second. And he wanted it to be the opposite. They just didn't agree, so they parted ways. And then, so at that point, they had to, and I think this was right after the album came out, so I don't think he really played any of these songs live, or if he did, it was only one or two shows, after that. Typically, when people leave a band, they say, okay, I'll do 5 more shows, and then that's it, or something like that. And so there's a really good video on YouTube of them playing all the Pathogenic stuff. But they have Luke Easter singing for them, but it's still Gary doing most of the vocal work, they had just pulled Luke in, and so that was really interesting to hear, and it's relatively good quality on YouTube if you search for like Tourniquet Cornerstone. I think it's like Cornerstone 94, 95.
It'd have to be 93 or 94.
Yeah, it was 93 or 94. I can't remember exactly, but it's really interesting hearing them play all the old material with Luke Easter singing on it, and it actually sounds pretty good. I was pretty surprised by it.
Are we going to talk about Vanishing Lessons now?
Yeah, I guess so. It's depressing to go to Vanishing Lessons only because this is the end of the old Tourniquet. This is the beginning. There's still remnants of it in Vanishing Lessons, but you've got a new singer, which is immediately noticeable. And you definitely have a new musical direction for the band. And I'll get into why I think that this album is very ironic once we get to the end of the discussion on it. So, what did you said you picked up Vanishing Lessons as a new release. So, tell me about that. What was your initial impression after hearing the old Tourniquet and then picking this up as a new release?
Around that time, it's been so well documented that nearly every heavy metal band in existence changed style around this time. Mm-hmm. So in one sense, I wasn't super surprised. And I was so into what they were doing that I was probably I was going to like whatever they did. So I still got into it. I think, it just wasn't as thrashy. It was more. It definitely isn't grungy, but it kind of like. I'm not saying it's grungy, but it sort of fit what was going on at that time, where it seemed nearly every band, like I mentioned earlier, was having like a radical kind of change. So it almost seemed like around that time, Mortification had done, and I'm even talking in the Christian scene, they had done Blood World. Deliverance had sort of switched to Learn, which was a different style. Striper were off the map by then. I think that's around the time that Bride did Drop. Yep, so it felt like every single band that I'd gotten into over the last few years had all of a sudden completely changed style. So I kind of felt like I just sort of had to roll with it a little bit. But I think that this album sounded a bit more like, I'm trying to think of the word for it. The other one sort of really rolled along and really, really moved. Whereas this album, everything seemed to come back a step. Do you know what I mean? Like it just didn't seem to have the
level is dialed back. Yeah.
Yeah, everything was dialed back, so it didn't make it a bad album by any stretch. But it just felt like what had been there before wasn't, and I suppose the reason it felt that way was because it had fundamentally changed. So I think it's probably pretty fair to say that from this album onwards, I feel like Tourniquet kind of they've never changed as much from album to album as they did between Pathogenic and Vanishing. Like it feels like everything that's happened since Vanishing has kind of been a bit of an extension maybe of what they did there, and that's possibly Luke Easter's vocals, because there is musical changes in there. But do you guys agree with me? Sort of set template for what's come since.
I consider this to be Tourniquet's Black Album. You know, there's a little bit of what was before, but a little bit more of this hard rock sensibility. I know when Metallica put out the Black Album, everybody started calling them hard rockica, they were, and I feel very much the same way about Tourniquet, although there are still songs that I think may have been leftovers or ideas that may have been leftovers from previous writing sessions. Like the song Vanishing Lessons, I still consider to be a pretty straight ahead driving metal song. And that's actually, it's weird, the title track is my favorite song on the record, but it is, that one was really good. Acid Head was really good. There's a lot of really good songs on the record, Drowning Machine, and Luke Easter was really interesting the first time I heard him, and I'll talk about this later, that I found Luke Easter's vocals to be very engaging right off the bat. It kind of had this like, it's really weird. He sounds then the way Dave Mustaine from Megadeth kind of sounds now. I don't know if you listen to.
That'd be a fair call.
Yeah, I don't know if you've listened to the newest you probably have the newest Megadeth album, Dystopia. Dave, I guess it's just Dave's getting older and his vocal delivery is a lot deeper and still gruff, so it actually comes across sounding very Luke Easter-ish in places. But Luke was...
No, I'd agree for sure with that. Yeah. I've noticed that on the last couple of Megadeth albums. I mean, I think everybody has noticed it. I thought it was... I know we're not talking about Megadeth, but I thought Endgame was the album where Dave most sounded like he'd really dialed it back. I thought it went up a bit. But then, on Dystopia, it doesn't have the same... Yeah, it's more. It's almost more spoken in some ways. What he does on that album, but again, we're not talking about Megadeth.
Right, we did that already.
yeah, I noticed that you had done.
I went off on a tangent on that one. Yeah, but
there is valid comparisons there. I think the thing that surprised me about this album when it came out, and this is no slight on Luke at all. I was surprised they just didn't go full Gary on this album. Like, he'd done so many lead vocals coming up to it. It would have maybe seemed like a more natural transition if Gary was just the lead vocalist on all the tracks on this album. I don't know if that ever crossed your guys' minds, but that was something I thought at the time. Like, that might have seemed a more logical direction based on where they'd been going.
I agree with you to an extent, but I think if I had been in the band at that time and I had been part of the decision-making process, the thought that would have come into my head would have been, well, how are we going to play the old songs?
Yeah.
Because Gary, Gary admittedly at the time was not a great singer. He was an amazing thrash metal screamer, he did that really well. But the actual, and I think that may have been the whole reason why they pulled Luke on, because Luke did have a good singing voice. He didn't really sound like Guy at all, which was interesting. But he actually, if you go back and listen to him sing Guy's parts on Pathogenic, they sound really good. So I mean, he was a good choice for replacement. But
I was just going to say, I could imagine, like, if you're in a rehearsal room as a band and Luke's trying out and you're jamming on the old material based on, I've watched a lot of those YouTube clips you're talking about as well. You'd think, this guy's got it. He can do the old stuff. He can bring his own style. Probably a little bit comparable to Ripper Owens in Judas Priest.
Absolutely.
Ripper obviously did a brilliant job on the Halford material, but then on the two albums that he did, he sounded nothing like Rob Halford, which I think disappointed a lot of people because, Priest tuned down on those albums. And, Ripper had been, again, we're not talking about Judas Priest, but I think there's a bit of a comparison there in that, he took his own original vocal material, this is Luke, in maybe a bit of a different direction, but did a really good job on covering the Guy material. So he brought a lot to the table. There's no question about that. And I think he's got a very relatable voice. Like, there's a lot of emotion and a lot of sort of like yearning in Luke's vocal style, and I found that I could relate to that as a listener, and that probably helped cover maybe the musical changes on this album for me, because Luke just had such an earnest delivery to the point now where I sometimes can't split which singer I prefer in Tourniquet. Like, sometimes I prefer the Guy stuff, but as we'll get to later in the discography, I think there's moments where Luke, and I've told him this over like Facebook, there's certain moments where I think is just sublime, his vocal delivery. So I'm a big fan of Luke, and I think he helped cover maybe the notch down in intensity on this album. So I still ended up I still loved it when it came out, but it was a very different listen for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this record, very hard rock, a lot of bluesy aspects. One of the things, there's a song called Pushing Broom that stands out to me a lot on this record.
I wrote that down on my notes.
Yeah, it's a slower song, but it really shows off, too, that Luke Easter actually has a really, really good melodic singing voice as well.
Yeah.
But again, it's not like Guy's where it's like off the planet, the high-pitched or weird. I've always felt like Guy's singing vocals were always very gruff.
Yeah.
And Luke Easter has that, too, but he can actually really deliver a clean, really nice-sounding, slower song. So you get stuff like that on My Promise and stuff. So what Luke brought to the table was actually the opportunity for the band to actually have a little bit more mainstream appeal, I think, than what they had, and we're going to really see that on Crawl to China later on.
And Pushing Broom was an influential song for me, to the point where I'll still, like, if I'm going through a period in life where, maybe things are moving a bit slow, or, how sometimes, I'm sure we all know, you go through periods where you're just going to work and, like, nothing, you talk to your friends, oh, what's been going on? You're like, oh, not much, and all that. I find that song really appeals to me, the whole concept of at least you're not afraid to push a broom another year. Like, sometimes the bravest thing is just to keep going and not let it get to you. So that song's been an important song for me, and I loved it the whole time. And the other one I wrote down on my notes from this album, my notes are actually just a list of my favorite couple of songs from each album. So that's my notes.
Awesome.
So it might sound like more than what it is. The other one I wrote down on this one was Acid Head as well. Because that was kind of a bit of the old Tourniquet, wasn't it?
It was more in their old school.
Thrashier.
Yeah.
I've always thought of this album to be an arena rock record in disguise. Because when I listen to the previous records, I love them, but I'm thinking, this sounds like a metal show. When I listen to this, I think, okay, this is kind of written for a stadium. Because they play everything out, they let the chords ring. Yes, it's hard rock aspects, but when you've got that good of vocal delivery that engages the listener, that's the kind of vocalist that you see play to 20,000, 30,000 people, and everyone is paying attention.
And when they would go over to Seas, I think that's how many people they played to.
Yeah.
So weird when you go outside of America. In America, you can be a decent band and still only play to 100 people in a club, and then go down to Brazil and 10,000 people show up.
Well, I think I've never been to America. I'm over here in little old Australia, but I think that the impression I get as an Australian seeing what happens in America is. I don't know what it's like in your city, but a lot of the big bands, they seem to, they tour most years in a lot of markets. So maybe would I be right in saying that you get a lot of options to see a lot of artists? So maybe there's more options, so the audience is a bit more spread out. Would that be
That's fair, yeah. But I think in America, one of the biggest problems with our society is that people don't equate the fact that going and seeing a live show is what keeps their favorite bands going.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those, like, oh, I can't do this because I'm going to this. Like, you don't, even if your favorite band comes to town, you don't see them every time they come to town because you're kind of taking it for granted. But it's like what you don't know is that they need you. They do need you to come to the show. They need you to buy a T-shirt because it doesn't matter how many times you streamed it on Spotify. The band's not really getting anything from that, not anything substantial. And I feel like when I was younger, more people went to shows in America, and now not as much. Like, your diehards are still going to show up, but for the most part, it's kind of slim pickings, especially if you're a band that's just starting out. Yeah, I think established bands do really well, but
Yeah, no, I can understand because like what we have over here when the big name US artists come over. There's huge cost for them to come over. So generally it's, part of a big tour because, like the smaller bands, they really can't afford to come to Perth, for example. I went to a Queensryche show when Jeff Tate was still in the band, and there was literally only about 50 people there. And they must have like cut such a huge, maybe 100. It was like, this is Queensryche, and they must have just lost so much money on that show. And then I noticed when they came to Australia next, they cut Perth out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't surprised.
That's been happening a lot lately over here, where somebody will come to town once and nobody shows up, and then 5 years later, they're still not coming back.
Yep.
Yeah, I think if you get burned by a particular city or whatever, like, you're not necessarily going to say, we'll have to go back to that one. But, I get the comparison with Vanishing Lessons, and it just got me thinking, there's probably, we talked about Megadeth before, there's probably strong similarities with Euthanasia, which came out obviously around the same time. So, I probably had thought of that before, but that same kind of, probably, less pedal to the metal kind of playing, more arena style, bit more emotional, bit more heartfelt. I think there's probably a valid comparison there in what they were doing. And I'm sure they were paying attention to what Megadeth were doing. They obviously, Euthanasia would have come after this, but it was that sort of mid-90s era, wasn't it?
Right. Everybody, the times were really changing,
Yeah,
and if you wanted to stay relevant, you kind of had to pick up that hard rock. I don't really want to say grunge, because I think grunge was a pretty limited movement, but I think one of the things that grunge did for rock in the 90s was that it established kind of a new era of heaviness, because I think before that you had rock. You had hard rock, but everybody was still listening to bands from the 80s. Because a lot of the hair metal bands, people would call bands like AC/DC stuff that was still hard rock. I think until grunge kind of came in, and then you had this kind of, and even Metallica on their Black album, I think, was really influential in making rock a lot beefier, than it had been before.
Yeah.
And so Tourniquet really embodies that. I mean, this album is still heavy, but it's not it's not thrash heavy. It's more more of your down-tuned, kind of more bluesy based. I mean, this is still a really great record, but what I think is ironic about this record is that one of the things that Guy Ritter said in his interview was that he wanted the band to tone their sound down a little bit for their next record, to do slower songs. And Ted pretty much told him, no, if anything, it's going to get heavier. And then they put this out, and it's like, dude, just imagine, I think if they had written these songs with Guy Ritter in the band, what this record would have sounded like. I think that's one of the big questions I always have about Tourniquet is, if they had kept Ritter on for this album, what would we have gotten? And maybe it wouldn't have sounded this good. I mean, I think Luke Easter is really the main ingredient on this record, that really, like you said, Vaughn, how it holds it together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it really, because he's coming in fresh. So his delivery, I think, is more energetic and much more fresh. I think even more so than the rest of the band, because they're used to doing this. They're used to recording albums and putting them out. Luke Easter's just psyched that he's in Tourniquet. Like that's that's a big deal, and you can definitely hear that in his vocal delivery. He really put his all into this, and I think in a lot of cases actually saved some of these songs that kind of tend to. The problem I have with this album is I feel like it kind of. I find myself skipping around to different songs. Yeah. Whereas on the previous three, it was just beginning to end.
Yeah, and you also mentioned the sort of slower, more reflective stuff, like My Promise, and obviously Twilight as well. And that was probably something we didn't see from them at all on the first few albums, in that sort of style, almost like just straight ahead rock, almost ballady in a way.
Oh yeah.
And he really delivers on those songs as well. Like I actually always liked Twilight. Like some people found it a bit too different. But I always thought it had a nice sentiment to it, and I still think it's and I say this with no disrespect to the theme, I'm pretty sure it's the only song covering that topic I've ever heard. Like, I really do. Like, I can't think of any other band that's ever talked about the plight of the elderly.
Yeah.
It's and they were very good like that. We talked about the social issues and whatnot, and that was something that stood out with Tourniquet. So you could always rely on them for a bit of commentary, maybe in areas you didn't necessarily hear from other bands. So it was an interesting time. But no, Luke did do a good job on this album. I would definitely agree.
You mentioned, why didn't Gary just take over lead vocals?
He couldn't have done this.
As a rhythm guitarist / lead guitarist that has more than once been kind of shoved into the lead vocalist role for one show because the person just bowed out at the last minute, I can only guess that if Guy was as upset with the band becoming as heavy as they were becoming, that he just became less and less interested, or less and less... He contributed less, I think is what I'm trying to say. And if you have the same mindset that I do when we're writing a song, I understand if you don't have anything written down, but at least get up and do something to kind of give the song a flow. And if you don't do that, I'm going to start doing stuff, because I just want to hear sometimes, and Dan's guilty of this, sometimes I just want to hear la, la, la. It helps. So I get the impression that's why he ended up doing more and more vocals, was because they weren't being given by the lead vocalist. But that's the only way I can come up with.
And then, like, Luke, came in as such a sort of pure vocalist that probably lent itself to that. And I don't know.
I'm so glad you're here, man. Take over, please. Take it all.
Yeah. it was more that comment was as much my perceptions of it at the time. Like certainly now I can look at it differently, but sort of at the time as a huge fan of his vocals on songs like Pathogenic, I wanted more of that because I wasn't thinking about melody or anything in those days. I just wanted more of the heavy, you know.
Come on,
right.
But also Eric's not on the scene anymore. We haven't really talked about any of the other members, so perhaps he lent quite a heavy tone with the dual guitars as well. So maybe his influence is not felt on the album as well, you know, in terms of the guitar work also. So there's that possibility also. I don't really know what the internal band dynamics were and who actually played what on the album. You hear different things, you know, about who played what and various albums, but it definitely was a stylistic shift for them. But one that I certainly gave plenty of airplay back in the mid '90s. It was constantly playing. I pretty much only listened to Tourniquet for a Tourniquet mortification for a few years of my life, I have to admit.
Yeah. There's worse things.
There's Risk by Megadeth.
I know we... Anyway. So I've been kind of putting it off, but we got to talk about Crawl to China.
Yeah. So you didn't want to touch on Carry the Wounded at all?
You can if you want. I've got it. You can if you. We typically only talk about the main studio albums, but
that's fine.
It's at least worth a mention. Yeah, that Carry the Wounded was an EP. Was it put out independently by the band, or was it I've got the cassette, but I don't remember.
Yeah, it still came out on Intense. I've got my copy of it here, but it was pretty much an acoustic, you know, much lighter sort of.
It was mostly covers, wasn't it?
Album.
Just Oh Well, I think. Oh Well was Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, that was that cover on it. I always liked the song Carry the Wounded. I thought it was kind of a bit of a pared down version of Vanishing Lessons. Like it seemed like a fairly logical follow up. Sure. When I actually got married back in 2001, we played When the Love Is Right because I was such a huge Tourniquet fan. It seemed important. I loved the fact that we could do that at our wedding. So that was one of the songs at our wedding, which was really cool. And I remember I emailed Ted to say we were doing this, and he emailed me back and said, congratulations on the wedding and all that. And that left a big impression on me as a Tourniquet fan as well.
Sure.
So probably for that aspect, it was important to me. But no, that's fine. It was sort of like really a stopgap kind of album in a lot of ways, leading into, like you say, Crawl to China.
Vaughan tried really hard to help you, Dan, but now we have to talk about Crawl to China.
Well, okay. This is the record where the band started sounding kind of like a Christian rock band. I think.
I hear what you're saying.
I think before that, and again, it's not even that it's bad. It is just so directionless in the sense that it is all over the place stylistically. You've got an awesome song like White Knuckle in the Rosary, which is a cool song, cool Tourniquet song. Could have gone on Vanishing Lessons probably, you know. And then you have songs like Enveloped in Python, which starts off just like him talking to a pet snake, and again it's weird and creepy and very tourniquety, but it's just very strange. The songs just seem very far apart from each other. And then there's that song Bats, which is just what even is that? You know, like it's just a very strange song. And it just seemed like a lot of their metaphors and stuff lyrically, they were kind of like like in Bats, they're like, you think they'll hit you but they won't, you know, you think they'll mess in your hair but then they have to explain that they're saying that, you know, just because you can't see God doesn't mean that God's not real, you know, like, and all that, like, and I get where they're coming from or whatever, but I feel like the old Tourniquet didn't have to explain itself, you know, whereas on this one, it just seemed very cheesy Christian rock to me. And that's not to say that there weren't really good songs. I mean, my favorite songs on that record are The Telltale Heart, I thought was really well done, and actually very heavy, which is interesting to hear. And I thought that, you know, I really liked, well, obviously White Knuckling I liked. And I also liked Imaginary Friend. I thought was a really good one by them. And but this was just so all over the place. Not what I was expecting at all. Because I mean, Vanishing Lessons still worked as a uniform album, and I feel like Crawl to China has 1 million tracks, and only like 4 of them are good.
Yeah, I think the first thing, like, obviously I can't see this on the podcast, but there's my copy of it from '97.
Oh,
so the original.
Hey, what's the first track on your copy? Is it Enveloped in Python?
Yeah, Klostro. I've never known how to pronounce it. Klostrophalenka.
Klostrophalenka.
Yeah, because they never actually say it in the song, so I don't know how they pronounce it, which sounds ridiculous. I obviously know the song, but yeah.
Well, the track listing on Spotify and Apple Music, the track listing's totally different than it is on the CD.
Yeah.
I think they moved it on the re-released
that they put out. But this was the Benson record version that I as I've sort of illustrated through the podcast, they were my favorite band, and this was just such a big deal to me when it came out, you know, because it'd been a couple of years since they'd done a full length, and they'd obviously done Carry the Wounded plus the Collected Works compilation, which had a couple of cool new tracks on it.
And they have It's a Good Night for a Hanging, wasn't that on the Collected Works?
Yeah, Perfect Night for Hanging. In fact, those 2 new songs on the best of were more like the old Tourniquet.
Yeah, they didn't sound like Crawl to China at all. I remember thinking that they sounded just like heavy Tourniquet songs. Yeah.
And that was kind of what I was hoping for on Crawl to China. But I do agree with what you're saying. It sort of almost sounded like an alternative rock album, this one, to me, when it came out. Like the thrash was definitely gone. It was there in moments. And as a huge fan, I still thought that there was a lot of talent on display in the album. But it definitely didn't have the same impact on me as the earlier stuff. I gave it every chance, and I listened to it a lot over that time. But no, I agree with what you're saying. It didn't quite have the same vibe, but I think it does suffer the loss of Gary. There's no question, because
absolutely.
I can remember when this came out. We're sort of in the relatively early days of the internet being all sort of like a proto version of what the internet is now, and Tourniquet had a website that I'd go to most days, and I can still remember like the update that Gary and Victor had left, and that, you know, next album, don't worry, like you know, we'll still do a great album. And I mean, I don't know who was writing the updates on their website, but
probably Ted.
I'd always assumed it was Ted, and maybe he specifically said it. I just don't want to quote him as being the one who said it. But I do remember the tone on the website was like, yeah, Gary and Victor have left. Thanks for their help. There's no big deal that they're gone. And I remember thinking as a fan, it kind of is a big deal that they're gone. Like,
yeah, I'm kind of upset. Yeah.
You know, like I wanted to give it every chance, and I did, but I did have sort of, I was thinking, gee, what's going on there? Like, there's some pretty serious members of the band just to sort of leave. But the internet was different in those days. I obviously didn't have Facebook and all that kind of thing. So you were relying on people's ability to update their old HTML sites and whatnot to actually get news. You know, so I remember sort of waiting a bit with bated breath about, you know, how this album would sound without Gary. And I think you can definitely tell his influence is gone. And I really hesitate to say this because I've had continue to have a huge amount of respect for Tourniquet, but in some ways they were never quite the same after Gary left. And I don't want to sound like a Gary fanboy when I say that, but he was a very crucial element to the Tourniquet sound. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely was.
Yeah.
This is the first Doom record by Tourniquet.
It's not Doom.
It's something.
They get there though, actually, in places. But anyway, yeah, no, I agree with you 100% that he was very instrumental, no pun intended, to the overall sound of early Tourniquet. I mean, it's undeniable. You can, even if you listen to his solo records now, you can still tell it's him playing. You know, it's not. He has a very distinct style to his playing, and you know, and I miss his thrash vocals. It's always weird to me too. Like if I watch a video of them playing Ark of Suffering live, and it's like Luke Easter's singing it, which already doesn't sound right. And, I think Aaron, the guitar player, was singing, yelling Gary's parts and stuff.
Yeah,
and it all just sounds like a very good cover of a Tourniquet song, but it doesn't ring true as being the band,
Yeah.
But I mean, you're going to get that. If a band is going to continue for as long as they have, people are going to come and go, unfortunately.
No, and I certainly don't. I don't hold it against them for or Ted. Really, it sort of became a Ted solo project. I don't know how he would feel about that, but certainly with the last album, which we'll get to, that was a Ted solo album that later got called Tourniquet. So, I don't think even it has been Ted's baby really ever since this era. And. Yeah, I think that it shows. I think that he did a good job of. I think that the album still got moments. Crawl to China. The songs I wrote down on my notes, just looking here, that stood out to me was I've actually written down Going, Going, Gone, which is another one of his sort of I suppose animal. Obviously, animal rights is a huge part of Ted's philosophy. But I always found the sort of swirling guitars on that song, and just that song always stood out to me. It's not a heavy song, but I like the way it was delivered, and the sentiment on the song. I thought that it was a sort of good way of dealing with that topic. So that song always stood out to me. And another one, sort of the same kind of thing as what you're saying with Bats. There was another one on there, If Pigs Could Fly.
Yeah.
Familiar with that song? I actually quite like that song. Very different, but I like the message in that song as well, and it always stood out to me, not as being a great thrash song, but it certainly it stuck in my head as a song that, I remember quite distinctly from this album. So those were the two that I wrote down. I'm not saying they're necessarily the best songs. There's Tire Kicking as well, which is probably the most traditional Tourniquet song on the album.
Yep.
Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely. Yep.
100%. And If Pigs Could Fly always seemed like the song that wasn't on Vanishing Lessons every time I listened to it.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to go back just one here.
Yeah, it's cool. This is one of those records that I do think it works as a rock record. If I just want to listen to rock, I'm not like reaching for the dial to turn it off. I'm not as angry about it as I was about like Risk from Megadeth or something like that, because they had already prepared me for it with Vanishing Lessons. I don't think that I was like necessarily surprised that Crawl to China sounded the way that it did, but I definitely as a metal fan, before I could just listen to Tourniquet anytime, and now I had to be in the mood to listen to it. I
always wondered with it, like I'm holding up the CD for you guys again. It's got all bright with the light in my room here, but like it's not a very metal cover, and it's a different logo. It looked like a sort of mid-90s alternative sort of logo that was really popular at that time. I often wondered how this album would be perceived, like how I would hear it if it had like the old Tourniquet logo and a heavy metal cover. So before I'd even heard it, if it had that image, because I think I don't know if I heard the album cover and the actual Tourniquet music was still in there, or if the music actually does sound like that album cover.
Right.
Am I making any sense?
Yeah, totally.
Well, that's kind of the same thing Metallica did when they put out Load and Reload. It was, well, now we have to have a new logo because we have a different sound. We're gonna cut our hair and look different. I think that was just another 90s thing. Like, you've got to innovate. You've got to be different. You've got to be new. And it's like, no, we don't. No, you do. And then they do this. And I think it would have sounded different. It would have been probably another Risk situation if they had the same logo and the same look of the cover, because it doesn't seem like the same band. It seems like one of those, we're just going to do something different because, well, it's not us. But if you're me and you have the reissue, which I can't hold up, but I am looking at it on my Google Music right now.
I know that. I'm familiar with the picture you mean. Yeah.
They threw it back and just tried to make it look the same, and it helps.
Try to trick us all over again.
It's kind of silly, but it looking like a classic record, it does help. And I really don't know why.
Yeah.
It's funny, like, you know, we talk about the 90s, but I was just looking, that was a 97 album, and you mentioned Reload, that was 97, and Megadeth were doing Cryptic Writings in 97, and Maiden were in between X Factor and Virtual 11. All those bands were, you know, Kiss obviously had done the reunion by then, but they put out Carnival of Souls. I don't know how much of a Kiss fans you guys are, but just about every band I loved at the time was doing very different stuff. Like
that was right when Tim the Ripper Owens was in Judas Priest. It was right around 97, wasn't it?
Yeah, they're another one. Jugulator came out. Look, there's metalheads listening to this, so I don't want to misrepresent, but I'm pretty sure Jugulator came out in 97. Just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So in 1997, there was a lot of classic bands putting out material that didn't really resemble their classic material. So I kind of felt a little bit left behind by it all, and I felt like I needed to adapt or die a little bit because no one was doing the stuff I remember anymore. I can distinctly remember that time period. Like, it felt like the old was gone. It really did.
Yeah, because, I mean, now you're like, oh, this band changed. I'm going to go listen to another band that sounds just like it. You didn't have that, you know. Back in the 90s, you couldn't just download an MP3 file. I remember the big thing was clips for a while. Whenever I first started getting on the internet, you could listen to a 10-second clip, and it would still take you 10 minutes to download that clip, you know.
Yeah, like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, around this time, no, it was a couple of years later, but I think it was a show from around this time, from Flevo. You could get a download of a Tourniquet show. And I remember downloading that, and it like took me like 2 days to download like a 40-minute audio of one of their shows. I can't even remember what the site was. It wasn't an official thing. People who were into Tourniquet at the time will remember it. It was like Live at Flevo. It was around the year 2000 or something.
You can pull the video up, I think, on YouTube now. You can see the audio and video.
Yeah, I'm sure it's out there, but I do remember downloading this WAV of it, and it must have been, you know, a couple of 100 megabytes when, it just took me so long to download. I remember that. And it was like, it was like in the absence of a live album, it was like, this is actually like Tourniquet Live. You know, I remember being really excited about being able to hear it. Whereas now, obviously, with YouTube, that sort of thing's commonplace.
Right. Well, that's part of the reason why people don't go see their favorite bands live as much either. Because you can get that experience without having to leave the house.
Yeah, definitely.
It's we take a lot of that stuff for granted, but man, music industry has really changed very rapidly in the last 10 years. I mean, it's unreal.
Well, I remember, don't crucify me for this because, we're a metal show, but I remember I had this mate who was the biggest Nirvana fan, and we would go into...
this guy.
Yeah, I like Nirvana.
Yeah. And back in the mid-90s, like when bootleg CDs were really expensive, we would, and pre-internet, I remember he would go in and we got a copy of what became the MTV Unplugged Nirvana album, but before it had been released as official album, there was like a bootleg CD of it. And he paid way over for it. He paid like $70 or something Australian for a CD copy, like a bootleg copy of this on CD. And for a few months at school, he was the king. Because he had this like Nirvana MTV Unplugged show before anybody had it. And I'm just thinking of the concept now of paying $70 for a CDR.
Right. Who would do that?
But he did.
Yeah.
When we went to Nashville for the Rock and Pod Expo, they had all the vendors. And there were a couple of them that had the bootlegs that were either live recordings or studio things that they still, it was $25, $30 for a copy.
$25, $30, yeah.
And I remember thinking, how much did it cost you? And how much are you charging the next guy? Or is this one of those legit bootlegs where this is recorded straight from the board and you're selling it to me and I'm the only guy that has it? Because I'm kind of in that mindset now where everything's digital, and if you can distribute it, don't overcharge. I guess is kind of the way I look at it now. It's unfortunately it started with I think it was Radiohead who put the first digital record out and said, "Pay what you want for it. Pay what you want."
Yeah.
And as soon as they did that, I said, "Okay, this is where the $20, $30, $40, $50 bootleg no longer matters."
You'll notice they haven't done that again though.
Well, you only have to do it once.
Well, yeah, but I thought that was interesting because how many people just paid a cent?
Yeah, that's right.
And with them being a massively popular band, maybe that still was enough, but it still is just crazy. But
I was going to say, I asked them to pay me to download it, but they didn't accept it. They didn't accept my deal.
Oh, bummer. Yeah, $5. I'll pay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Tourniquet was interesting though, and it really appeared that between Crawl to China and Microscopic View, it seemed to me as if they had actually listened to the fan input.
Oh, absolutely.
From client, they're like, okay, we get it. We tried doing something different, so we went with Microscopic View of a Telescopic Realm. And, I mean, right off the bat, you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This sounds like old Tourniquet, you know, like, it doesn't really, and I'll get into that later, but.
This album for me, was just the biggest return to form. It was such a pleasant surprise after Crawl to China, because I really thought that Crawl to China was where they were now.
Right.
At the time, it was a 3-year gap, and there was nothing. There was the one song on the Acoustic Archives, which was quite heavy, and that gave me some sort of thought. I still would have supported Tourniquet if they had made Crawl to China Part 2, don't get me wrong. I would have bought it. I would have listened to it. I would have respected it. I wasn't expecting such a return to form, and this was like the best present that they could have given me, this album, because I don't know. I've always thought it resembles Pathogenic a lot in terms of its sound and style. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's immediately what I was thinking was Pathogenic whenever I first heard the first song. Well, I think it's called Besprinkled in Scarlet Horror. Yeah,
that's
and it's
correct.
just really that really fast picking that, I guess it was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they've actually listened to what people complained about and said, okay, we'll make the record you want us to make, because most bands don't do that. And I have respect for both sides of the issue. I have respect for the band to say, well, no, we're a band and we write the music that we write. You take it or leave it. But I also understand that, like, hey, we've got this dedicated fan base and they would really appreciate it if we played music that they, that they would want to buy. So I totally understand both perspectives on it. And I think a good artist has a little bit of combination of both in mind.
It's the metal version of overwhelming customer input. It's like, hey, we like your store, but this thing that you're trying, it's just not working for us. You know what? Just about everybody has come back and said, we need to change this, guys. So let's write Microscopic View of a Telescopic Realm.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I remember, seeing the cover when it was released online, and we talked about the cover of Crawl to China, and I'm just holding it up for you guys. I mean, obviously you'd be familiar with the cover.
Yes,
I love that cover.
But I mean that is a thrash metal cover. That is a Tourniquet album cover. So even when you saw that online and you had the first song come off, and I think it might have been. I have a feeling the Tomb of Gilgamesh might have been the song that. Somebody will probably correct me on that, but I have a feeling they might have put Tomb of Gilgamesh out first. I'm actually not going to stand by that because it was a long time ago now.
It was such a big song, I think they cut it in half.
Yeah, but whatever they put online, it was like such a return to the sound, and it's caused me to reconsider a comment I made earlier about Vanishing Lessons being the sound going forward. They definitely, after Crawl to China, like in the year 2000, they definitely got heavier again. You still got the Luke Easter sort of impassioned vocal performance, and I think that this album and the next one are probably like Luke's finest hour in terms of his vocal delivery. I thought that this sort of era of the band was really good, and after I wouldn't say for me that Crawl to China was a disappointment, but it was definitely a sidestep. I was just so relieved and happy with this album, and I didn't stop playing it for a very long time because it was like my Tourniquet was back. Even the song titles were back. Erratic Palpitations of the Human Spirit,
right?
And Besprinkled in Scarlet Horror, which we've mentioned, Immunity, Vector.
They even did a Skeezix Dilemma Part 2.
Yeah, exactly. The Skeezix Dilemma Part 2. I mean, it was kind of there is a bit of fan service going on there, isn't there? I'd never really thought about it that way too much, but it's kind of like their Force Awakens in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, they tried really hard, I think, to emulate the old sound. I mean, even in Besprinkled and Scarlet Horror, that's not Luke Easter singing or screaming at the beginning. That's their guitar player, Aaron.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean? And so it's one of those, like, they're really, really trying to return to that original sound. I mean, obviously Luke Easter is unmistakable, so he's never going to sound like Gary, or I'm sorry, he's not going to sound like Guy. But, you know, it really, I mean, if you wanted to hear what it sounded, if you wanted to hear what Pathogenic would have sounded like with Luke Easter, well, this is it.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that's brilliant about this album is it is similar to Pathogenic. The twists and turns in the albums, like in the songs, the way, you know, you'll be going through a section of a song and then it will come into a completely new section and it will be like a more intense vocal delivery, or it will be really fast and it'll be very wordy. The bit that always stands out to me is one of the songs where he comes in and he goes, "The time has come to speak of many things." It's like a completely different delivery to what happened before. It just takes you on this musical journey, and just those bits where you get a 30-second section and you're driving along in the car and you're like, I love this bit. Like, I find that 10 or 20 seconds can make a 7-minute song. You know, you can love a song, you know, because of this 10-second section that's in the middle of it can really make it a standout track.
That's one of those spots where your foot becomes 5 miles an hour faster and you're like, oh, speeding.
And I was just really I was just super impressed by this album when it came out, and it was an important album for me back in, it was 2000, wasn't it? Yeah, I'm just looking at it now. It was 2000, and it's one of those albums, we always talk about soundtracks of our life. I mean, I just think of that era of my life when this album comes out. That would have been the main thing I listened to that year, I'd be guessing. That and Brave New World by Iron Maiden. I'm a massive Iron Maiden fan as well. They're my favourite band. So you probably heard me mention them a few times.
Yeah, absolutely.
The songs that stood out for me on this, just when I wrote down my notes before, was Besprinkled in Scarlet Horror and Drinking from the Poisoned Well and Microscopic View of a Telescopic Realm, the title track. I think that they're all very, you know, they have lots of different sections in them, lots of, they go through a real emotional journey, all of those songs, and they're just very good compositions. And I think the songwriting was a huge improvement on this album.
Yeah, it was. And this is where I kind of like that, and a lot of what I said earlier was very much my initial impression. And upon listening to this several times before, and I'm not saying this like it's a bad thing, it's very much like the old Tourniquet. It is meant to sound like the old Tourniquet.
Yeah.
But the more you listen to it, the more you start realizing that it really kind of has its own sound.
Yeah.
The production and atmosphere that was present on Pathogenic is not here. This record sounds really clean. A lot of the guitar parts sound somewhat isolated, and I understand that was how you recorded in 2000.
This was the dawn of digital recording being mainstream available, especially to independent groups or lower end groups that didn't have access to the money budget studios.
Right.
And everybody was still figuring it out.
Yeah, so I feel like the notes don't ring out here. And I feel like they're, you know, some of the impact of the songs, I think the songs probably, because I've seen them played live and they're much more aggressive and much heavier sounding than they are on the record, which is, you know, great. I mean, as a metal fan, you want that. But
was this the record that Ted Kirkpatrick made into a drum instructional DVD, or was that the next one?
I think he just did his own material for that. I don't think he used any of the Tourniquet material. But yeah, but I mean, this is just, I feel like the drums were louder than everything else on this record as well.
That's why I brought it up.
Which was bound to happen, you know.
Yeah, and that sort of, again, the Ted lead drummer kind of vibe.
Well, I mean, it's really his band at this point. You know, he is the band, you know.
Yeah, that's right. And it's almost like you know, I've sort of tried to articulate this with my friends over the years, but it's almost like, yeah, he's like the lead vocalist, but he's playing drums, and his voice is his drums. It's such a critical part of the sound. That, I mean, I think the perfect example in talking about that is the Echo Hollow material. I think, you know, if you listen to the first Echo Hollow CD, that's basically what Tourniquet would sound like without Ted on drums, and it almost sounds like Tourniquet, but in parts it sounds a lot like Tourniquet, sometimes even more like Tourniquet than Tourniquet did at times. But without that, I think that, yeah, Ted's drums is you know, is just as important as any vocalist to defining something as being Tourniquet.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Yeah.
You know, so this record, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I think this record, while I think was originally intended to sound like the old material, definitely pushed forward with its own identity, because you're going to hear that on the next record.
Yeah.
You know, in spades. Whereas I feel like where Moth and Rust Destroy is a little bit more of a representation of what the band was really sounds like in the early 2000s. You know,
yeah.
This really cemented, because it took a lot of the ideas from Microscopic View, but I feel like they kind of dropped a lot of that. Let's try to sound like old Tourniquet.
Yeah,
and kind of started forging off in their own direction, which I think was a really good move.
Are we on to that one now?
Or, oh, yeah, we can, unless there's... Yeah, sorry, I didn't...
Oh, no, that's fine. No, I just want to get... you know, I'll get talking about it, and... but
yeah, we're on that, for sure.
That was what I was asking. No, I do agree. They sort of... it's sort of like... In a way, it's like the sequel. It's like... We're making a lot of movie analogies. It's like Empire Strikes Back to Star Wars a little bit. There's elements that are the same, but it does have its own identity that's separate from it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's definitely the Empire Strikes Back, I think, of the... if you want to call them a trilogy starting with Microscopic View, I think for sure.
Yeah.
This is the cream of the crop of the three, in my opinion. We'll get to Antiseptic here in a little bit, but this record really long, epic songs, really letting Luke shine on a lot of these songs. I feel like Luke has some of the best. Like, his personality really shows through on this.
Yeah.
You know.
I made the comment earlier that you know, when we're talking about Vanishing Lessons, I talked about Luke and that sort of emotional, the way he delivers that. I find it a very personable style, like almost like he's singing to you in the room where you're sitting. Mm-hmm. Like almost like you feel like you could sit down and, you know, share a meal with him while he's singing. It's
sure.
It's got this style about it, and I sort of can't split these two albums, because there's when Where Moth and Rust Destroy came out, when it was a new album, it actually did take me a little while to get into. I don't know what I was expecting. I wondered if it was the guitar tone. It was a little bit more droney. I think it was a bit different, but I had this funny experience where I was actually on a ferry over to Belfast, of all places. I've been to one trip to England and Ireland in my life, and so I was on a Scotland to Northern Ireland ferry, and I was listening to this on the trip, and it was all of a sudden it just hit me. You know, sometimes an album just grabs you when it might take you 10 or 20 or 30 listens, and This one took a bit longer to hit me. Like, I loved the previous one so much, but I remember listening in particular to Healing Waters of the Tigris, and I'm on this ferry watching the water lap along the side of the ferry, this song about Healing Waters of the Tigris, and it just sort of at that moment struck me as being, you know, a really fantastic album. And I've talked to my friends who like Tourniquet, and they don't all praise this album, and they sometimes wonder why I love it so much. Maybe I'm just a fanboy. So I'm really pleased to hear you say you like it, actually, because I wasn't sure what your reaction to this one would be.
There's a list of records that I think are great, but they suffer from early 2000s, early digital mixing. And the older I get, the more I start to notice that really was a good record. It just kind of suffered from the times.
Yeah.
But then I always am able to justify it to people by, well, have you listened to the drums on every 80s rock, hard rock, and most of the hair metal records ever? Because it was all that very sloppy digital snare that was the early days of digital drums.
Yeah.
And it'll never go away. It's always going to be there. Best example is everything by Def Leppard in the 80s.
It's funny because why did the word hysteria pop in my head when you started talking about that?
Vaughn, I think we have some connection here that we're going to have to explore at a later date.
Guitar players, man.
What can I say?
Yeah.
But when I listen to it, my first thought is, oh, the guitar sounds horrible.
Yeah.
What year was this done? Oh, that's right, 2003? Yeah, that's about the right time where all the guitars sounded like crap.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. It's not punchy. Like, it's supposed to be really heavy. Like, it's written heavy. It's played heavy.
Yeah.
It just doesn't sound heavy on the recording. But once I got past that and really started digging into the songs, there's a little bit more of a doom metal. And that's whenever I say that the album actually was meant to be heavier than it really sounds, is because I hear a lot of doom metal in this. The songs, a friend of mine used to say that all the songs just drag on, they're long, they're boring, whatever. And I'm like, well, that sounds like maybe they were going for more of a doom metal sound. And I hear that a lot on this record. Ghost at the Wheel probably stands out as my favorite song on this CD. Followed very closely by Architeuthis, because who can say no to a song about a giant squid?
Yeah, and again, like everything,
that should have been the cover.
A bit like A Dog's Breakfast. Everything I know about giant squids, I learned from that song.
Right,
pretty much.
I don't know. Were the giant squids being mistreated?
We've actually since then we found the giant squid.
I know, and when they found that, I was a teacher at the time. I was teaching high school. And I'm not doing that anymore. But at the time of that, I was like, these guys, this band that I love, they talked about it before it was actually found. So I knew about this before. Then now they found it. It's incredible. And I remember sharing that with the kids. They all thought it was a bit crazy. But it's like that whole thing where heavy metal is my textbook as well as, my favorite style of music.
So when can we expect Grey Forsaken to put out the Loch Ness Monster?
Right. You're going to be ahead of
Judas Priest did a song on Loch Ness, and this is how much of a crazy fanboy I am. That same trip, actually, when I was listening to this album on the ferry from Scotland, we visited Loch Ness a couple of days before that. And I stood on the edge of Loch Ness, listening to the Judas Priest song Loch Ness. So that was an evocative moment, actually.
Yeah.
That was a good moment, and
that's cool.
I'm glad I did that because that was pretty cool. No, we haven't done anything like that. I don't think, where we've sort of gone the full scientific. Maybe that's food for thought. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Oh crap! What have I done?
And I know this has nothing to do with music, but I just have to stop for a second and say, so much stuff in human history, like that was based in folklore, turned out to not be true. So how cool was it that the giant squid was a real thing? That's what just blew my mind. And because it doesn't necessarily sound like something impossible. You have enough water. They always say fish or sea life accommodates to the size that it's given. But it's so crazy because you're just expecting it to be disproven, and they couldn't find concrete evidence for years, and now we have it on video. The giant squid is real, like that. It just blows my mind, and I think about that song all the time whenever I read about that. It's crazy that it's no longer a mystery. I'd like to think that Tourniquet is the one that opened up our collective minds to to solve the riddle.
Yeah, I wonder what. I did wonder at the time if the guy who discovered it was a Tourniquet fan.
Yeah.
It was quite funny.
Wasn't he a tiny Japanese scientist?
I think all scientists should be Tourniquet fans. I mean,
it was. Yeah. It was a Japanese scientist. It's funny, like, I think it does. These things get on our collective consciousness, and I'm sure there's not a Tourniquet fan who didn't immediately, like their eyes lit up when they saw that discovery. Quite
Maybe
cool.
they played the song underwater, and they were just responded to Architeuthis, "Show Yourself to Us."
Yeah,
I don't know.
Maybe. Quite possibly. But it's interesting. You mentioned that your friend said that songs were that you found the songs quite boring.
Yeah.
I would never go as far as to say they were boring, but I did mention that it grew on me, and I never thought they were boring. But I think that this album, I really agree with how you've sort of said it about the guitar tone. Once you can get past that, there's a very rich album there. And for me, the highlight of the album is definitely Healing Waters of the Tigress. I love that song. And the other one, I love the title track. Actually, Tourniquet quite often get it right with their title tracks, because it can be a bit cliche to like the title track as one of your favourite songs, but I do think it's a strong song on this album. And, talking about when's Grave Forsaken going to write a song about Architeuthis, we certainly have written things about the concepts in Where Moth and Rust Destroy. I very much agree with that philosophy in life, that the worldly things, and this is whether you've got a Christian worldview or not. Even if you think that we ultimately all die and nothing happens, I still think that like worldly possessions are ultimately worthless apart from what to meet our needs in the now. But
Sure.
I really agree with Ted's philosophy in that song in particular, and I think it's a strong message and an important message. So that song's always been a standout to me. But really, I like the whole album from top to bottom. As as cliche that and fence sitting as that might sound, I just think that they really put out a good couple of albums in a row with this and Microscopic View.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel like the two records can't exist without the other.
Yeah.
I think they're because I think the title track on Moth and Rust, it sounds the most like Microscopic View.
Yeah, definitely.
Like it's very much got that sound. And I thought that was pretty impressive that even though Microscopic View was supposed to be a return to form, it really was more of an establishment of a new sound than it was, just a repeat of what we had before. Calling it like The Force Awakens is kind of right on. Like it's trying to establish its own new identity while still retaining what people enjoyed about it from the past. So that moves us on into Antiseptic Bloodbath. Now, I remember this was a really big deal. Yep, when it came out. See, I never got the digital. I never got the physical copy of that. I bought the digital on iTunes, I think.
Yeah, I'm still a CD guy, but that's just the 90s in me.
I'm a vinyl guy, so it's...
Yeah.
I'm still all about CDs, especially with music. I mean, I drive around with my iPod fully loaded still because, I can. I love lossless audio, but now is the time to buy CDs, especially with lossless audio, because almost everything I want is like $7.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it sounds better in that form than it will ever sound if I buy MP3s.
Still doesn't feel as good as having a vinyl record.
Nothing will ever feel as good as vinyl until we get the tape machine set up.
No, I got it. No, actually, I now have a fully functioning cassette deck.
No. I said the tape machine, the reel-to-reel.
Oh, yeah, okay.
We're working on that one.
Fair enough. But no,
I love vinyl as well. I'm just looking over at my. I don't have a huge record collection, but I do love to put on albums on vinyl when I can. I just find them a little bit prohibitively priced now that they've gotten popular again.
It's like $30 for something, $30 US even, and that's insane for buying an album when you could buy the CD for $7.
Yeah, and we get a lot of those US printed versions, and so they'll be $45 Australian by the time they get into the shops that sell them. So
wow,
not all the time, but they can be pricey.
Even the Mortification reissue of Scrolls on vinyl was insane. Insanely priced. I didn't end up getting it. I wanted to get the Horde one. I wanted to get the Mortification one. And he even put that. They even put out where they put Overseer and Ancient Prophecy. Yeah, which I thought was really cool. Just I couldn't it cost the same amount for 2 songs that it would have costed for an entire album.
Yeah, it certainly is pricey, the vinyl, and it's got a lot to do. I assume it costs a lot to press as well, and that's part of the whole pricing. But yeah, it's I do love it though. I definitely love sitting down and listening to a record. It's probably the ultimate listening experience. I think most people agree.
Can't skip songs.
It's still, and I'm gonna people will hate me for saying this, but I still find a CD still quite convenient. You know, I've got a CD player in virtually every room of the house, just various ones I've accumulated over the years. So I often just pop in a CD wherever I happen to be in the house, whatever I'm doing. So I still find that quite convenient. And I've also got like a Bluetooth speaker, so I'll often have a lot of stuff ripped onto my iPhone as well, and I do that a lot as well, just play through the UE Boom speaker off my iPhone. But yeah, I suppose music's like that now. There's lots of different ways you can listen to it, isn't there?
Yep. I mean, I can listen to whatever I want pretty much any time. I mean, unless it's like so underground that it's not on a streaming service.
Yeah.
Which is what I used to really be into, man. Underground Christian death metal. That was my thing for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's interesting now to hear that a lot of that stuff, that a lot of those bands ended up, getting better, and the ones that weren't so good thankfully disappeared, And but I just found it really interesting that Tourniquet throughout all of this whole period, because I think I was probably the most active in Christian metal between 2005 and 2008, or maybe even 2009 a little bit. And so Antiseptic Bloodbath by Tourniquet was one of the first, or one of the last Christian metal albums that I bought, still being fully immersed into that scene. And I was not disappointed at all. And it's one of the few that I still listen to, because I probably still listen to only a few Christian metal bands, and they're the ones that I think are the best, the best of the bunch. And this record still holds up to me as it was kind of it's kind of like they had gotten over all those issues of the guitar not sounding as sounding processed and things. I think on this record really the notes are loud, everything rings out, it's got its own atmosphere to it. And this record is just kind of all over the map as far as metal styles go. There's a lot of classic metal. There's a lot of doom metal. There's a lot of just straight ahead thrash. Yeah. They just do whatever they want, and it works.
And this is interesting in this discussion that we're having. As somebody who has sort of taken each Tourniquet album as it's come since Vanishing Lessons, it's not really until we've broken it down now. I've never sort of analysed it in terms of just what a trilogy of albums. I mean, it's obvious in hindsight, but yeah, these three albums really do form a trilogy of albums, don't they? And
absolutely,
there's that whole sort of there's similar themes throughout them. It's the same lineup more or less. They've got we've talked about the song titles. This one's full of fantastic sounding Tourniquet song titles. The Maiden Who Slept in the Glass Coffin. This is such a Tourniquet sounding song.
Yeah.
Like, they're really good at naming their songs. I presume it's Ted who does it. He's really good at coming up with titles that sound like a Tourniquet song. He must sit there and write lists of them and say, yeah, that sounds like a Tourniquet song.
Got
that
a whole
sounds
notebook
like a Tourniquet
probably,
song.
yeah. For the next 10 albums, he probably has a notebook,
Yeah, that's right, where he handpicks titles. And I just want to touch on that song, The Maiden Who Slept in the Glass Coffin. To me, that song is Luke Easter's finest hour. I've said that a few times about Luke Easter, but I love his vocal delivery on that song. Do you guys have are you particularly familiar with that track?
Yeah. That's one of my favorites, being that violin led, which at this point, if you look at the last two albums, pretty consistent with their sound. So I wasn't surprised by this at all. But man, this song I like because it really lets the music breathe. I don't think Luke Easter even comes in right away. I think it's a couple of minutes before he even says anything.
And it's one of those ones where he doesn't actually sing that much. It's quite sort of understated what he does, but it's just the atmosphere of the music. And then when he comes in with the line, "The seven kept a vigil by her side, refusing to believe that she had died."
Yeah.
We talked about spine chilling stuff with some of the earlier albums, but that raised the hair on my neck. Just the way he came in. There's just something about it. It's very understated, and it's But there's just something about the way it builds, and then when he comes in with that singing, and you know, we've talked about that emotion in his voice and the way he, you know, that sort of that relatable vocal style that he has. Yeah, to me, that just that verse just epitomizes like the best bits of what Luke Easter brought to Tourniquet. It's, that just stood out to me the first time I heard the album. Like that section, I was like, yeah, that is good. That's a really good little section of a song. So I messaged him at the time saying, you know, fantastic delivery on that, and I don't know what he thought of that. He emailed me back and said thanks for that, but you know, I even felt compelled to tell him I was really impressed by it.
Yeah, that's cool, though. I mean, even though I think a lot of the time musicians don't know what to say, you know.
Yeah.
When somebody just starts saying, oh, well, you did really good on this, because you don't want to be like, yeah, I know, I wrote it that way, because then you come off sounding like an ass, you know. But beyond that, it's like, you know, so you always end up with the thank you, but then you're like, well, the thank you maybe sounds a little impersonal, but, you know, I think it definitely boosts people up in a good way. And
yeah, for sure.
You know, I always try to give credit where credit's due, and with this band especially, I think that to me this is the last great Tourniquet album. And
depending on how you look at it, this is the last Tourniquet album.
Technically, it is. I mean, so far, you know. And it can't be understated that this was everything that they had accomplished on the first two records. Again, yeah, it being a trilogy, because you've got the original trilogy with Guy and Gary and Victor and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then you now have this new trilogy where I feel like in a lot of ways they did kind of achieve what they had achieved before. Again.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it was definitely the whole thing was a return to form. Like the other one, you know, I feel a bit cheesy saying it because it's the opening track, but I do love Chart of the Elements. I think that has, it's got all those Tourniquetisms in it. You know, they're sort of singing about a scientific topic. They're making an analogy with, you know, an analogy between God and a scientific concept, and you know, it sort of hits all those Tourniquet notes,
right,
if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And so that was a standout track to me on this album as well. And it just so happens that my background is I'm a chemist by trade, so I've sort of dealt with the periodic table a lot in my own sort of career, and I've spent some time as a chemistry teacher as well. So you know, that song had a good personal, you know, it appealed to me on a personal level, like both topically and as a piece of Tourniquet music as well. But
sure.
I think there's lots of great moments on this album. I think 86 Bullets is a great song. I think Chamunda's Temple Stampede is another great song.
Flowering Cadaver is really good.
Yep. You know, he does the whole... like, you know, we haven't really touched too much on Ted's actual, you know, life philosophy. We've mentioned it a little bit, but as this album, then obviously the next one, you know, he really has moved quite strongly now into that, you know, sharing his philosophy on animal rights. You know, it's always been in Tourniquet, but it feels like it's front and center as much as the Christian message now on the last couple of releases. Would you guys agree?
I would agree. I mean, the whole point of Antiseptic Bloodbath was the idea of, like, he feels like because we, and I could be wrong about this, but this was just my interpretation, was that he was saying with Antiseptic Bloodbath that, you know, people, that humanity is okay with violence and okay with horrible acts as long as it doesn't affect them personally. I guess that's where like the antiseptic part of it comes, and that actually the cruelty that we put on animals, you know, just to produce our food, you know, that he makes a comparison to Jesus, that we just shred up Jesus for our forgiveness and for our benefit and everything. And really interesting concept. I don't know if I'm 100% on board with it, but I remember it actually being controversial, and that's probably why they did as well as. And actually, that was part of the reason I think I was on. Let's see, is Firestream.net? Does that site still exist? I haven't been there in a long time.
The Vault still is around, but
the Vault's there.
In terms of forums, I think Christian Metal Realm might be the main forum that's still. Someone will correct me. I think it's all through Facebook now. Like most of the discussion seems to happen through Facebook groups now.
That makes more sense.
But there was Firestream was definitely a hotbed of Tourniquet discussion, that's for sure.
Well, to the point where Tourniquet actually, I think Ted had some kind of sway over that website, because if somebody started saying something that was really out of line, or was like revealing things that the band didn't want revealed yet, or something like, or basically just saying false things about the band, like stuff that wasn't true. I remember Ted was able to actually get in there and have all that shut down.
Yeah. I've been I've never really understood the politics behind Tourniquet. They seem to have more, just in terms of what you're talking about, they do seem to generate a lot more controversy in comments and things like that, and they seem more inclined to comment the discussion around Tourniquet seems to get a lot more heated than it does around other bands for whatever reason. And it's got a lot to do with, I think a lot of people find Ted's views confronting because they might disagree with them. Right. My take on it has always been that I wholeheartedly respect, what Ted is saying, and that's his point of view, and I admire the passion and the sort of like he puts himself up for a lot of flack for what he says, and he cops a lot of flack for his views. So I sort of admire the way he sticks to his guns with those views. And in truth, like I probably, if not for my love of Tourniquet the band, I would probably have zero awareness of any sorts of animal rights issues. So sure. If nothing else, he has been my conduit to that world, and it's given me what little understanding I do have of that issue. So I sort of applaud him for how he's put that before his own personal. Like if he had just dropped the whole animal rights thing, he would have avoided a lot of criticism and debate. But I sort of admire the way that he stuck to his guns on it over time. People would disagree with me for saying that, but yeah, at least he's believes in something and is passionate about it. I think that's good on him.
Yeah, and I don't think it's too bad here. I think this record still has all the components of a good Tourniquet record. The songs are amazing. They really are. They're complex. My favorite song on this one is "Fed by Ravens, Eaten by Vultures."
Yeah,
that song is pummeling. It's brutal. It's hopeful. It's everything you want out of a Tourniquet song. Even at the end, I think the most chilling moment is whenever when I think it's Ted that even says it. He's like, the members of Jeroboam's family died in the field or died in the city. Were eaten by doves. And it's so chilling just hearing his voice on there like that. And that song just ends in just brutality. It's as heavy as Tourniquet's been in years.
Yeah,
that song really just. It's probably my favorite song on the entire record, which is weird that it's the last song, but it just sums it all up, man. It's it's a great ending to a spectacular record, and I actually kind of like listening to this. If you use Spotify or any of those streaming services, there's a instrumental version of this record.
Yeah,
which is fun to listen to as well.
There's an instrumental version. I never actually got the instrumental version. I think you could get it off their Bandcamp page, but
probably yeah,
I did notice that they had done that, and it sort of lends itself to that. I listened to that track not all that long ago at all, and I was I did notice just how epic it does end the album on. But yeah, they definitely they did some amazing things, and I certainly wasn't disappointed with this album one bit. Like I'm a first day buyer with anything that Tourniquet does. Not that I can walk into a CD store in Perth and buy their album, but I'm a first day pre-order. Let's put it that way.
I haven't seen one of those in years.
I want that thing as soon as it's available. Whenever they've got something out.
Sure.
This album is unique to me because I have to consciously tell myself, you're listening to Tourniquet. It has its own atmosphere. It has its own. There's spots in here where, okay, yeah, I'm listening to Tourniquet, and then there's other spots where, what am I listening to again? And it's not a bad like I forgot who I'm listening to. It's good. It's a good evolution in their sound when you can still give somebody a good atmosphere that makes them forget that they're listening to a band that's been around for 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I still find it unmistakably sort of that modern Tourniquet sound, but I do understand where you're coming from with that, because it does have its own sort of it's got quite a foreboding atmosphere, really, the whole album.
It's one of their darker ones, like thematically.
And I think, you know, talking before about hearing the album cover, I think, you know, I think the album cover sets the tone, you know, quite effectively for what the music is inside.
So we got to talk about the next one, don't we?
Yeah. That brings us now to the present.
Okay.
So I can tell by that maybe you had some reservations about it.
I'm not as into this one.
Yeah.
It is literally the first Tourniquet album that I've been like, what are they doing? Since Crawl to China, at least.
I was about to say.
Even that, Crawl to China sounds more like Tourniquet than this does, in my opinion.
Yeah, the question I've always had with this album now, I mean, I was following pretty closely online, you know, through Facebook, and like Ted's obviously very active on Facebook, and I see all these posts that they always turn up in my feed and everything. You know, it started as the Tourniquet Arc project. You guys were familiar with that whole sort of thing that was going on?
It was basically Ted's solo music, yeah. Yeah,
pretty much. It was his. And there's people who will know the details better than me, but I think the chain of events was it was a Ted solo album, then it was Tourniquet Arc, and then sort of just before release, it was announced it was going to be credited to Ted Kirkpatrick and Tourniquet. It actually says Tourniquet / Ted Kirkpatrick. So it's I can see where he's coming from, because I think musically I think if Luke were to have sung the whole album from start to finish, I think it would sound like a Tourniquet album, because I think basically the music has a good chunk of the songs are heavy like Tourniquet songs, but then there's some more sort of rock orientated songs that maybe go back to something like My Promise or When the Love Is Right, or, you know, not that sound like that, but If I Was There, that kind of more mellow vibe, you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, so I get it.
I could imagine that if there was one vocalist on it, it might sound like a more cohesive start to finish album. But I think, and this isn't just this album, I think any album that's got different vocalists on every song, I think a perfect example is the first Tony Iommi solo album. Are you guys familiar with that album?
Yeah.
Where for some reason they called it Black Sabbath because they had to.
No, that was the second Tony Iommi album.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking. Yeah, there was the first one which became the Seventh Star, but then there was his 2000 solo album, which had there was like, I think Dave Grohl sung a song. I hate doing this because people know more than me. Semo sang a song. Anselmo, Ozzy Osbourne sung one song on it. But I think for me, when you have an album with multiple vocalists, like per song, I can handle 2 or 3 vocalists from the band, you know, kind of what Tourniquet did in the early days. But I think for me, that's the key factor that makes it lose its cohesiveness as an album. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got Luke Easter on one song.
Yeah.
And it's already a previously established Tourniquet song.
Yeah.
So it's one of, and I guess it's cool hearing him sing it. But and I remember being very relieved when I got to that song because it just sounded so familiar. Tourniquet to me, you know, Luke Easter singing, it's a song I know already, you know, that sort of thing. But I remember just being very jarred because I kind of do feel like the tracks are written to match the vocalist that's guesting on it.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, at one point they're basically playing like almost a metalcore type song.
Yeah.
You know, to match the guest screamer they had on the record, which I don't think was completely necessary, but I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I like metalcore, you know, but I just don't. I just don't think it. I just don't think all the pieces fit together.
It reminds me of Roadrunner United.
It's like listening to a compilation.
Where the only thing that's really wrong with it is that it's called Tourniquet.
Yeah. You know, you touched on the metalcore thing. Like, I'm, as it stands, I don't listen to a great deal, if any, metalcore stuff. It's not that I'm inherently against it or whatever, but I just tend not to listen to it.
It's just not your jam.
Yeah, that's right. So when I'm getting a Tourniquet album, I'm not looking for metalcore on it. So that was probably the couple of songs that are quite metalcore were pretty jarring for me. But you know, my view has always been, and this is with any band. It's not just with Tourniquet or Ted Kirkpatrick. I think it is the artist's right to put out the album that they want to put out, and as the listener can discern whether that's an album that they want to consume, I guess.
Sure.
So I respect his right to have this album, but it probably just didn't hit the notes for me that the previous ones did. I certainly like the song they did with Michael Sweet. Obviously, it's the title track. But I did make the comment, Tourniquet tend to hit the mark quite well with their title tracks. I think that probably is the strongest song on the album. And I was thinking about, why do I think that? And I think probably out of the vocalists they chose on this album, probably Michael Sweet and then the guy from Disciple, Kevin Young, they probably got the most Tourniquet sounding voices. Like, I could actually imagine Michael Sweet singing on a Tourniquet album.
Yeah, just have him sing the whole record. That would have been great.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really good track, and it was a good thing to get Michael Sweet on it. And but yeah, like the other one that stood out to me is actually one of the Gabby Ray songs, Cage 23, and it's probably the part of me that, you know, liked songs like Twilight. I thought that had a really heartfelt vocal delivery, and you know, hard not to, I don't know how you guys feel, but hard not to get emotionally affected by the sentiment of that song. What do you guys think?
I hear him revving up back there.
No, it's okay. I'm not gonna go off. But I just, for whatever reason, the message of this record as a whole, and I'm not trying to detract from that song in particular, but just. Like my wife is a vegetarian. She does not believe in the inhumane treatment of animals.
Yeah,
and I totally respect that, and I support her. So being a guy that's married to someone like that, even then I kind of felt like it was still very, like, I never felt like Tourniquet was ever trying to shove a message down my throat.
Yeah,
this record, it very much felt that way. It was very. It's exactly the kind of thing that people don't like from Christian music, although it's weird because it's not necessarily the Christian message that's being shoved down your throat here. I think they make comparisons to Christianity, but I almost kind of get the impression that they're trying to say that you're like a bad person if you're not 100% on board. And it is so much more heavy-handed than it has ever been. Like, I mean, everybody thought Antiseptic was controversial, but this record was like 10 times that.
Yeah.
In the sense that it really brought home that message. And I respect that Ted has a platform to say what he wants to say. But it's one of those, like, do you really want to take the band name of Tourniquet and potentially, because I think people that were irritated by that, because I feel like at this point in their career, Tourniquet is really being supported by their diehard fans. I don't think that they're necessarily winning over new fans. I think a lot of bands like this, as great as they are and as technically solid as they are, I think at this point you're really being supported only by your diehard fans. So those are your people that are going to crowdfund your project. Those are people that are going to go to your shows and buy your shirts and stickers and things. But I don't think, you know, a kid off the street's necessarily going to be converted to a Tourniquet fan tomorrow. unless he just really likes thrash for some reason, you know. And so again, it sounds really mean, and that's not what I mean. But I feel like a lot of their diehard fans are more on the Christian conservative side of things.
They definitely are, yes.
So you start spouting off stuff like animal rights and veganism and too much, you're going to get a lot of backlash from that. And I think it's going to be very interesting if we get another Tourniquet record, what direction that's going to go in and how many people are going to still be on board after this.
Yeah, I think this didn't surprise me because I was following, like I mentioned before, is on my Facebook and all that, and a lot of those sort of animal rights issues, like Ted talks about them very openly, even when he's not discussing Tourniquet. So
right.
To me, this sounded like the Ted that I saw on Facebook. So nothing on this surprised me based on the content of, I'd seen this before. Yeah, I'd seen this coming. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, and I wasn't surprised either. I'm just thinking. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, and I understand as well. So I guess I knew what I was buying into when I ordered this CD. I ordered it as a long-term fan and somebody who understood, that knew I was getting that with Tourniquet. I hope on the next album, it'll be interesting to see because they are recording one.
But they've already replaced Luke Easter as a vocalist.
Yeah, that's right.
So now we've got someone else. Uh-oh.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes, and I have a feeling it might be more back in the style of this is just my guess. Maybe we'll get another thing a bit like Microscopic View and Where Moth and Rust Destroy, like thematically and lyrically. I have a feeling that maybe we'll see it go back a bit more in that direction as opposed to, I feel like this was perhaps, a bit of a one-off, concept album around the animal rights issue, but we'll see. Time will tell.
I definitely like the second cover more than the first cover. There's one with a rhino on it.
That's what I got when I ordered it from the band or from Ted.
And now there's actually another cover. Let me see if I can pull it up here. It's,
I can picture the other one
with the one with the raven on the front of it.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's right.
I can hold it up, but you're not going to be able to see it from here.
Yeah, I know the one you mean because I'm familiar with both of them. But that's obviously the one I've got. But it's an interesting one. And when I was thinking about this podcast during the week, I was thinking, the latter years of Tourniquet did really get quite controversial online, and how would I sort of tread that as a fan? In discussing it, because it is quite awkward to discuss because they have been some of their themes have been quite divisive really in the fan base, haven't they?
Absolutely. Although the old albums would have been that way too, there just wasn't an internet then.
Yeah, that's right. But I think if nothing else, and I hope this doesn't sound like a cop-out band, a cop-out comment, at least he's and I do think of Tourniquet as Ted these days. At least there's something to talk about there. It hasn't just faded into total obscurity like a lot of artists do. Like there's actually people still care enough to have an opinion on it. So that in itself is in the internet crowd, that's probably a good thing to have on your side. Have people still care,
I agree 100%. I appreciate the fact that Ted's still doing it. I can tell you as a fan, I definitely don't want this album again. But who cares what I think? I'm just some guy that lives in, you know what I mean? So it doesn't really matter, but in the grand scheme of things, I think I can't write the band off completely because that's the thing about Tourniquet is I never really know what they're going to do next.
Yeah.
I'm either going to like it or not like it. And it's kind of exciting to, to anticipate.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, that's right. And I'm excited about seeing what they have next, and we're probably at a similar juncture in their career to where they were going into Microscopic View. Like, you know, have had this come off a divisive album that some people felt didn't really represent the Tourniquet that they loved, and to see what their next move will be. You know, will it be like a Ted-led effort, or will the other members have more contribution than they, you know, like the Onward to Freedom album? It really does, you know, come across as, you know, a Ted solo album, and you know, I hesitate. I mean that with no disrespect, because as I've got some of the Ted solo albums that he did, you know, the Ode to Roadkill and those kind of ones as well. As a fan, I would have bought it whether he called it Ted Kirkpatrick or Tourniquet. So in a sense, to me, it didn't make any difference because I was going to support him as the artist anyway. But I definitely understand why it is divisive. So I'm hoping the next one will be more of a band effort for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be a good move at this point. But man, did we make it? Did we make it all the way to the end?
We did. It's a huge podcast, so I had a feeling we'd talk for a while because I'm a talker, and
me too.
You know, there's such a deep band. There's so much to talk about, and there's so much we haven't even touched on.
I know.
We're gonna have that opportunity now because I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Vaughan first. Final thoughts on Tourniquet.
Well, I think that Tourniquet I think they're the premier Christian metal band out of all of them. I think they're the best example of a band that you know, was the equivalent to anything that was in the non-Christian realm, and they were sort of the band that you could hold up as an example of quality Christian music the whole way through. And I think they've done really well to navigate the controversy and continue to put out good albums to the point where, you know, here we are still talking about them. And I'm hopeful that that they've still got a few good albums in them. I'm really keen to hear what comes next, and I'll continue to be a fan. And I've really, really enjoyed delving into their catalogue tonight. It's been great.
I'm going to say that if you're a guitar player, if you're a metal fan, if you're a thrash metal fan, Tourniquet is the best band you've never listened to that plays metal. And if you haven't listened to Tourniquet, you need to go find a copy of the collected works, listen to that, start there, and then move on. I recommend Psychosurgery. Dan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, it's very easy, as I've done in the past with other bands, to just say, yeah, the first songs were great and everything else sucked. But that's not the case with Tourniquet at all. They're a band that has stayed amazingly consistent, amazingly relevant. There's been other Christian metal bands that kind of start leaning more on the side of cheesy and generic and formulaic. And it bugs me to no end that I feel like there's a quality loss. And I feel like with Tourniquet, we've never had a quality loss. I mean, yeah, sure, I disagreed a little bit with the lyrical content of one of the albums, but that does, as far as the actual playing goes, you know, we're not looking at a sophomoric effort here. They had some of the greatest musicians ever appear on that album. And I could see, you know, I could see where they were going, but I think really throughout their career, I think they've just had a really good, solid sound that has carried them, you know, that's carried them through. And in 2017, I mean, I'm still excited to hear what a new album's going to sound like. So, I mean, that's paramount to what they've done as a band for me as a person.
And what is your album of the week, Dan?
Well, I've been listening to Tourniquet all week, Joe. So,
you know the rules. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be Tourniquet, but it can be.
It has been. I've been listening to Antiseptic Bloodbath more than anything else. I listen to that one the most.
Vaughan, what about you? Album of the week?
Yeah, well, because I've been reviewing the discography, but Tourniquet are a band I often listen to anyway, whether I was going on this podcast or not. I have to default to Psychosurgery because it's one of my favourite albums of all time, and just talking about tonight has, you know, solidified that view for me. So I'm going to say Psychosurgery.
2 tourniquets. Do I go with the flow or do I paddle upriver?
Not as long as you're not going to say something stupid like Godsmack or something.
Godsmack is not stupid. We will discuss them at some point. I'm going to paddle just a little bit upriver and say Midnight by King Diamond, because that was kind of my take a break from Tourniquet for a split second while I'm working. Just listen to some King Diamond.
Did I tell you that I found the first Merciful Fate album on vinyl, Melissa, the original release?
And it's not on my pile right there. Why?
Yeah, it was like $1 at a thrift store. I couldn't believe it.
Why didn't you buy that?
It's in perfect condition. I don't know. I might give it to you because I don't really want my kids
listening to Merciful Fate,
reading the lyrics to that. Yeah, so I don't
want to quote Randall Graves, but let me help you out of your chair, Grandma.
We were just talking about albums. I was listening to The End Complete by Obituary a bit this week as well.
Oh, that's a good one.
I don't know exactly why I pulled that CD out, but I gave that a few spins also. It's not my album of the week, but you're talking about left field. So it's not super left field. It's heavy and thrashy and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was one I also had spinning a bit in between Tourniquet stuff this week.
Very cool.
Where can everybody find Grave Forsaken online? I know you've got the website, but I'm not sure about anywhere else.
Yeah, well, obviously our website is just graveforsaken.com, and if you search Grave Forsaken in Facebook, I'm quite active on our website and on the Grave Forsaken Facebook. They're the best places to go. And at the moment, we're affiliated with Soundmass, so soundmass.com is where we sell most of our albums. I mean, you can get them off our website as well, but we like people to get them through Soundmass if they can. So yeah, our Facebook page, I think the best way to get it, I couldn't tell you the URL, but I think it's just search for Grave Forsaken and you'll find us in Facebook.
Pretty much,
and graveforsaken.com. I try to put something up there every day on one or both of those sites. So if you're interested in Grave Forsaken and want to read some of my ramblings, there tends to be new content all the time, and check it out.
And on that note, this has been episode 33 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks. Big thank you to Vaughan Gregory from Grave Forsaken for talking Tourniquet with us, and that was a mouthful. We'll see you guys next week.
Did he just say Godsmack was stupid?
Well, Dan said it.
Well, he's stupid.